My name is Julia, 33 years old, and today I just shattered my family's illusion of superiority without saying a single word. We were standing right at the premium check-in counter at Los Angeles International Airport, heading to Hawaii for my parents' 40th anniversary. My older brother Bradley stood right at the front of our group, waving his first-class boarding pass like a golden trophy. Then he turned to me, holding out a crumpled paper boarding pass with 2 fingers. Economy. He smirked, letting it drop onto my suitcase. Do not complain. This is all you can handle. I did not argue. I simply stepped past him and placed my identification on the scanner. The ticketing agent gasped as her entire monitor flashed a blinding red. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our household meant constantly competing for approval that was entirely conditional on traditional success. My parents, Richard and Linda, valued titles and money above all else. Bradley, at 36 years old, was their absolute pride and joy. He was a high-power investment banker, or at least that is what he loudly reminded everyone. His wife, Patricia, matched his energy, perfectly draped in designer logos, always looking at me as if I was a charity case they had to tolerate. We were supposed to be celebrating my parents' milestone ruby anniversary. Bradley had made a spectacle of organizing the trip, claiming he booked an exclusive luxury experience for the family. The family group chat had been flooded with his boastful messages about securing first-class seats for himself, Patricia, and our parents. He deliberately left my travel arrangements vague until this very moment, at the airport, setting the stage to publicly humiliate me. I stood there in the bustling terminal, wearing comfortable travel clothes, while Patricia adjusted her expensive sunglasses and sighed loudly. She leaned against her mountain of matched designer luggage, tapped her perfectly manicured fingernails against the counter, and crossed her arms. I hope we do not have to wait too long for Julia to check her economy bag, Patricia complained. The lounge stopped serving the good champagne at noon, and Bradley paid a fortune for us to have a luxury experience. My mother patted Patricia on the arm sympathetically before turning a stern, judgmental glare in my direction. You should be more grateful, Julia. My mother scolded, her voice carrying that familiar tone of profound disappointment. Bradley went out of his way to graciously include you on this expensive trip. He works incredibly hard to afford these luxuries for the family. The least you can do is accept your economy seat with a humble smile and not ruin the celebratory mood today. My father chimed in, adjusting his golf shirt and shaking his head in dismay. If you had just stayed in law school, you could be flying first class on your own dime by now. But you had to selfishly throw away a perfectly good career path to run that little travel blog of yours. It is embarrassing when my colleagues ask what my daughter does, and I have to tell them she writes articles for a living. You are 33 years old. It is time to join the real world and stop expecting your brother to subsidize your life choices. I listened to their familiar chorus of insults without letting my expression change. They had been reciting this exact script for nearly a decade. When I was 24, I walked away from a prestigious corporate law track because the environment was soul-crushing. I chose to start a travel and hospitality blog instead. To my family, this was the ultimate betrayal of their upper-middle-class values. They immediately cut me off financially, assuming I would fail, and come crawling back to beg for my law school tuition. What they did not know was that my little travel blog had grown. It had not just grown into a bigger blog. Over the last 9 years, I had parlayed my connections into a massive portfolio. I transitioned from reviewing luxury resorts to acquiring them. Then I moved into aviation. My holding company now controlled billions of dollars in global assets. But I kept my wealth hidden from my family, knowing exactly how toxic their greed could be. Bradley stepped up to the premium desk, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing right behind him. He slapped his platinum credit card onto the counter with an arrogant thud. 4 for first class, he announced loudly to the agent, making sure the people in line heard him. And my sister here is in basic economy, Zone 5 boarding. Do not let her try to upgrade. She cannot afford the fees, and I am certainly not paying for them. The ticketing agent, a young woman with a polite but tired smile, processed his tickets. Patricia snickered loudly, linking her arm through Bradley's arm. Do not worry about us, Julia. Patricia teased with fake sweetness. "We will save you some complimentary peanuts from the front of the plane. Maybe you can write a little blog post about the legroom back there near the bathrooms." My mother sighed dramatically, pulling her travel scarf around her shoulders. "Just make sure you do not bother us during the flight, Julia. Your father and I need our rest, and Bradley has important emails to answer. We cannot have you coming up to the premium cabin and causing a scene." I looked at the four of them standing together in their wall of shared arrogance. They were so confident in their narrative. They truly believed I was a struggling, penniless disappointment who was lucky to simply breathe the same airport air as them. I picked up the crumpled economy boarding pass Bradley had dropped on my bag. I looked at the cheap paper, then looked right into my brother's smug face. "You are absolutely right, Bradley," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and calm. "I will not be sitting in economy today. And I definitely will not be bothering any of you in first class." Bradley rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, mocking laugh. "Oh, please, what are you going to do? Beg the agent for a pity upgrade? I told you, I am not paying for it. You have to learn to live within your limited means, Julia." I did not respond to his taunts. Instead, I stepped up to the counter next to him. I reached into my purse and pulled out my identification. I handed it to the ticketing agent. "I believe there has been a mix-up with my profile," I told the agent. "Could you please scan my identification directly into the main system?" Bradley scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "This is pathetic. You are embarrassing yourself, Julia. Mom and Dad tell her to stop holding up the line." The agent took my identification and placed it on the main security scanner. She typed a few keys on her keyboard. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the entire atmosphere at the check-in desk shifted. The agent's computer monitor suddenly flashed a brilliant solid red color. A loud, rhythmic warning chime sounded from her terminal, completely different from the usual processing beeps. The agent gasped, her eyes widening to the size of saucers as she stared at the screen. She looked from the monitor to my face, then back to the monitor again. Her hands actually started shaking. "Excuse me," the agent stammered, her voice trembling. "I need to call the general manager immediately." Bradley stepped forward, looking irritated. "What is the problem?" he demanded. "Did her card decline for the baggage fee?" "Just put her luggage on my account so we can get to the lounge." The agent completely ignored Bradley. She picked up a red emergency telephone and whispered frantically into the receiver, her eyes never leaving my face. Seconds later, a set of heavy frosted glass doors behind the ticketing counter flew open violently. The airline general manager rushed out with two security officers trailing behind him. He completely bypassed Bradley, who had puffed out his chest expecting a greeting. The manager walked straight up to me and bowed his head respectfully. "Miss Julia," the manager said, his voice carrying clearly across the quieted terminal. "We sincerely apologize for the confusion. The system triggered a code red holding owner alert. Please follow me. We will escort you directly to the private owner's residence suite on the upper deck." Bradley stood completely frozen in absolute shock as the security officers stepped between us, leaving him furious and totally confused at the regular counter. He watched helplessly as I retrieved my luggage and walked away from his petty insults, stepping into a world he could never reach. I walked away from the ticketing counter, the heavy glass doors gliding shut behind me. The terminal's noise vanished, replaced by the hushed music of the private elevator lobby. The general manager pressed the button for the top floor, apologizing profusely for my brother's behavior. I told him it was fine, I was used to it. The elevator chimed and the doors opened to the exclusive lounge reserved entirely for executives of the airline group. I took a seat in a plush leather armchair overlooking the tarmac, savoring the silence. An attendant brought me sparkling water and a warm towel. For 12 minutes, I had total peace. Then the heavy double doors at the entrance of the lounge burst open. The disruption was loud enough that the other executives lowered their newspapers and glared. Bradley stormed past the frantic receptionist, his face twisted in absolute rage. Patricia was right behind him, her heels clicking aggressively as she scanned the room, her eyes widening at the sheer opulence she had never been allowed to enter. Bradley spotted me sitting by the window and marched over, fists clenched tightly. He did not care that he was disrupting billionaires. He only cared about reasserting his dominance over his younger sister. He slammed his hands down on the small table next to my armchair, knocking over my glass of water. "Who did you sleep with to get up here?" he hissed, his voice echoing across the quiet room. "Or did you just hack into my frequent flyer account and steal my miles? There is absolutely no way a broke travel blogger gets escorted past first class into a restricted suite. You scammed your way in here, and you are going to tell them to upgrade my wife and me right now." I slowly wiped the spilled water from the table with my napkin, not looking up at him. "I did not scam anyone, Bradley," I said calmly, "and my travel blog is doing just fine." Before he could yell again, the lounge doors opened. My parents hurried in, looking terrified of the security guards and completely enraged at me. My mother Linda marched up to my chair, her face flushed with indignation. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "How dare you embarrass your brother like this?" she demanded. "We are celebrating our 40th anniversary on a trip that Bradley generously paid for, and here you are throwing a childish tantrum to upstage him. You deliberately manipulated the ticketing agent just to make him look bad." My father Richard stood beside her, arms crossed tightly. He looked at me with the same expression of profound disgust he had worn 5 years ago. "You have always been a spiteful girl, Julia," he stated coldly. "This is exactly why we cut you out of the will the first time. 5 years ago, when Bradley needed $50,000 to launch his new investment startup, we asked you to empty your savings account to help your family. You selfishly refused. You chose your ridiculous travel writing hobby over your own flesh and blood. We cut you off financially to teach you a lesson about loyalty. Clearly, you have learned absolutely nothing. I am telling you right now, Julia, if you do not march back down to that desk and fix whatever scam you pulled, I am writing you out of the estate permanently." I leaned back in my chair, letting their words wash over me. 5 years ago, their threat to cut me out of the will had left me crying in my tiny apartment, terrified of losing my family forever. Today, their threats were nothing more than empty noise. I did not need a single dime of their money. I certainly did not need to steal Bradley's frequent flyer miles. I looked at Patricia, who was frantically waving down an attendant. "We need a drink after dealing with this psychotic behavior," Patricia announced loudly to the terrified waiter. "Bring us a bottle of your most expensive vintage champagne. We need to calm our nerves before this flight." The attendant nodded nervously and hurried away. My family stood around my chair, glaring at me as if waiting for me to break down and apologize. I stayed perfectly silent, watching the planes take off through the windows. 10 minutes later, the attendant returned with a silver ice bucket, rare vintage champagne, and 4 crystal flutes. He placed them on the table, then respectfully handed Bradley a black folder containing the bill. "Since you are not registered guests of the owner suite, sir, any premium alcohol requests require immediate payment," the attendant explained politely. "The total is $1,200. Bradley smirked, pulling out his platinum credit card and dropping it onto the silver tray. He looked at me with a triumphant grin. "See this, Julia. This is what real success looks like. I can drop $1,000 on a Tuesday morning just to deal with the headache of looking at you. Learn your place." The attendant took the card and walked to the portable payment terminal near the bar. We all watched in silence. He swiped the card. The machine beeped a sharp tone. The attendant frowned, tried the chip reader, and tapped the card. The machine beeped again, printing a small slip of paper. The attendant walked back to our table, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "I am so sorry, sir," he murmured, keeping his voice low to save Bradley from embarrassment. "Your card has been declined." Bradley's triumphant smirk instantly vanished, replaced by sheer panic. "That is impossible," he snapped, snatching the card back. "Run it again. The machine is obviously broken. I am an investment banker. I make more in a month than you make in 5 years. Do you know who I am?" My mother stepped forward, trying to soothe him. "It must be a bank error, darling. Maybe they flagged it for travel." Patricia was turning bright red, looking around to see if anyone in the lounge was watching her husband's card get declined for champagne. The attendant stood his ground. "I assure you, sir, the terminal is working perfectly. The bank has placed a hard freeze on this account. Do you have an alternative method of payment? Bradley patted his pockets frantically, pulling out two other credit cards. He handed them over. The attendant ran both. Declined. Declined. The silence at the table was deafening. Richard and Linda stared at Bradley in absolute shock. Patricia looked like she was going to be sick. Without saying a word, I opened my small handbag. I pulled out a solid, unmarked black metal card. It had no bank logo, no spending limit, and no name printed on the front. It was a tier of wealth my family did not know existed. I held it out to the attendant. "Put the champagne on this," I said calmly. The attendant took the heavy metal card, recognizing instantly what it was. He bowed his head. "Right away, ma'am." He tapped the card and the transaction approved instantly. Bradley stared at the receipt the attendant handed me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked from the black card to my face, unable to process how the sister he had just handed an economy ticket to had paid his bar tab without blinking. "Where did you get that card?" Bradley demanded, his voice shaking with fear and rage. "Who are you stealing from, Julia?" I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. "I am not stealing from anyone, Bradley," I replied. "But you might want to call your bank. It sounds like you have some serious financial problems." Before Bradley could scream again, the heavy wooden doors of the lounge opened once more. The general manager, who had escorted me upstairs, walked briskly into the room. He did not look apologetic this time. His face was entirely stern, all business. He walked directly up to our table and stopped in front of my brother. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, holding out a printed piece of paper. "I need to speak with you regarding your travel arrangements." Bradley puffed out his chest, trying to regain his shattered dignity. "Finally," he sneered. "Tell this attendant to leave and upgrade my parents to the suite right now. I am a first-class passenger on this airline." The manager did not flinch. He handed the paper to Bradley. "Actually, sir, you are no longer a first-class passenger," the manager stated clearly, his voice carrying through the deadly silent lounge. "We just received an urgent notification from corporate security. Your payment method for these flights has been flagged for suspected wire fraud. We have been instructed to cancel your premium reservations immediately. You and your wife are being downgraded. If you cannot provide a legitimate form of payment within the next 10 minutes, we will be forced to contact airport police and remove you from the premises entirely." Bradley scrambled to pull a lower-tier credit card from his wallet, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He paid the fee to avoid the police, his face a mask of utter humiliation, while Patricia sobbed quietly into her designer handbag. I did not stay to watch them drag their luggage toward the economy terminal. The general manager personally escorted me onto the aircraft before general boarding even began, leading me up a sweeping spiral staircase to the upper deck. The owner's residence suite was not just a seat, it was a fully enclosed private apartment in the sky featuring a plush leather armchair, a separate full-sized bed, and a private ensuite bathroom with a shower. I settled into the luxurious leather seat, accepting a glass of freshly pressed juice from my dedicated flight attendant. As the plane taxied down the runway and soared into the sky over the Pacific Ocean, I opened my laptop to review some acquisition contracts, enjoying the absolute silence of my soundproofed cabin. For 3 glorious hours, I experienced perfect peace at 30,000 feet. That peace shattered when the heavy sliding door of my suite was shoved open with a violent thud. I looked up from my screen to see Bradley standing in the doorway, panting heavily. He looked completely unhinged. His expensive tailored shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His tie was loosened and his eyes were wild with a manic, desperate rage. He had completely bypassed the flight attendants, marching up the spiral staircase like a man on a mission to destroy. Patricia was not with him, likely too mortified to leave her cramped middle seat in the back of the plane. "You little scam artist," Bradley hissed, stepping into my private cabin and slamming the door behind him. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "I know exactly what you did. You hacked my accounts. You froze my assets. You deliberately flagged my cards for wire fraud just to humiliate me in front of those people in the lounge. You have always been insanely jealous of my success. But this is a federal crime, Julia. I'm going to have you arrested the second we land in Maui. I slowly closed my laptop and set it on the mahogany table next to me. I looked at him completely unbothered by his empty threats. I did not hack your accounts, Bradley, I replied, my voice steady and quiet. Your own bank flagged your accounts because of your suspicious financial activities. If you are moving money illegally to fund a lifestyle you cannot afford, that is entirely your own fault. Do not blame me because your house of cards is finally collapsing. Before Bradley could launch into another screaming fit, the cabin door slid open again. My parents, Richard and Linda, pushed their way inside. They both looked exhausted and thoroughly miserable, their faces pale from the cramped economy cabin they had been forced into. However, their misery instantly vanished the moment they saw the sheer opulence of my private suite. My mother's eyes darted wildly around the room, taking in the full-size bed, the luxury amenities, and the massive television screen. Her shock quickly morphed into deep, familiar indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" Julia, my father demanded, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with his golden boy. He gestured aggressively toward the leather armchair I was sitting in. "How dare you sit up here in this ridiculous luxury while your brother is suffering in the back of the plane? Bradley has a very delicate back. You know he has severe lumbar issues from the stress of managing his high-pressure investment firm. Sitting in a standard economy seat for a 5-hour flight is going to cause him permanent physical damage." My mother pushed past Bradley and placed her hands firmly on her hips, glaring down at me with absolute authority. "It is completely selfish of you to keep this suite to yourself," Linda scolded, her voice rising in pitch. "Your brother paid for this family vacation. He is the only reason you are even on this airplane today. The decent, respectful thing to do is to give him this seat immediately. Pack up your laptop, grab your purse, and go down to seat 32B. Bradley needs to lie down on that bed right now before his back spasms start." I stared at the three of them, absolutely marveling at their audacity. They had spent my entire life prioritizing Bradley's comfort over my basic needs. They had cut me off financially, verbally abused me, and treated me like a second-class citizen. Now, standing in a private suite they could never afford, they still demanded that I surrender my comfort to cater to a brother who had just tried to publicly humiliate me at the check-in counter. It was a level of entitlement that bordered on true delusion. "No," I said, simply, not moving an inch from my chair. "I am not swapping seats with anyone. Bradley's seating arrangement is his own problem. He bought an economy ticket because his fraudulent credit cards were declined. I am staying exactly where I am. You can all return to your assigned seats before the flight attendants call the air marshals." My father's face turned a violent shade of crimson. He slammed his hand down on my mahogany table, causing my glass of juice to rattle. "You ungrateful, vindictive little girl," Richard shouted, completely abandoning his country club manners. "We should have never allowed you to come on this anniversary trip. You have done nothing but cause trouble and try to upstage your brother since we arrived at the airport. I am ordering you to get out of that chair right this instant. Bradley is the head of this family's legacy. He is a successful investment banker who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. He deserves this suite." I let out a short, cold laugh. The sound stopped my father dead in his tracks. He stared at me, bewildered by my absolute lack of fear. I looked directly into Bradley's panicked, sweating face. "He is not carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the cabin like a razor blade. "Bradley's back problems would not be an issue at all if he was not carrying the heavy burden of a hidden second mortgage on your home." The suite plunged into an icy, suffocating silence. The ambient hum of the airplane engines seemed to disappear entirely. My mother froze, her hand hovering in midair. My father blinked, his aggressive posture instantly collapsing into pure confusion. They slowly turned their heads to look at their beloved golden child. Bradley looked as though all the blood had been violently drained from his body. His skin turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray. He backed away from me, his eyes darting frantically around the cabin like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. "What is she talking about, Bradley?" my mother asked, her voice trembling with a sudden terrible uncertainty. "What second mortgage? Our house is completely paid off. We paid off the mortgage 10 years ago. You handled the final paperwork for us." Bradley swallowed hard sweat pouring down his forehead and soaking the collar of his expensive shirt. "She is lying. Mom," he stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. "She is making things up to cause drama. You know how Julia is. She is trying to ruin your anniversary trip with her vicious, psychotic lies. Do not listen to a word she says. We need to leave this suite right now and talk to the flight attendants about having her restrained." He reached out to grab my mother's arm to pull her toward the door, but Linda jerked her arm away. She was staring at me, a profound sense of dread settling over her features. My father looked equally terrified, finally realizing that the daughter he had dismissed as a failure was sitting in a billionaire's private suite holding secrets that could destroy their perfect world. I simply reached over to my table and picked up my digital tablet. I tapped the screen a few times, pulling up a highly confidential legal document my corporate investigators had intercepted yesterday. I rotated the tablet and slid it smoothly across the polished mahogany table toward my parents. Richard leaned forward, his hands shaking as he picked up the device. Linda leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the bright screen. I watched their expressions shatter in real time. It was a formal bank foreclosure notice registered against the family estate, citing 3 years of unpaid loans on a massive second mortgage they never authorized. Right at the top, stamped in bold red ink, was the date of the final property seizure, for next week. The rest of the flight over the Pacific Ocean passed in a suffocating silence. My parents sat completely paralyzed in their seats, staring blankly ahead as the reality of the foreclosure notice settled into their bones. Bradley had retreated to the lower deck long before the descent began, likely hiding in the airplane bathroom to avoid facing the very people he had secretly bankrupted. When the wheels finally touched down on the sun-baked tarmac in Maui, the tropical paradise outside the windows stood in stark contrast to the absolute devastation inside our family dynamic. We deplaned and collected our luggage in a rigid, unspoken truce. Bradley was visibly sweating through his designer polo shirt, his eyes darting nervously toward our parents, but he desperately tried to project his usual arrogant bravado. He strutted ahead of us toward the waiting luxury transport, loudly promising Patricia that this trip would be the ultimate display of their incredible wealth. He was practically vibrating with the need to regain control and prove to everyone, mostly to himself, that my revelations on the airplane were nothing but a temporary inconvenience. We arrived at the Ocean Crest Resort, a sprawling ultra-luxury property renowned for hosting celebrities and billionaires. The open-air lobby smelled of fresh orchids and sea salt, featuring massive marble pillars and a breathtaking view of the private bay. Bradley marched straight up to the gleaming teakwood front desk, slamming his hands down on the polished surface to command attention. He loudly announced our arrival, specifically demanding the keys to the $5,000 a night presidential villas he claimed to have reserved months ago. He tossed his premium credit card onto the counter with an exaggerated flick of his wrist, glaring back at me as if to say he was still the undisputed king of this family. The front desk manager, a polished man in an immaculate linen suit, picked up the card and swiped it through the terminal to process the standard $20,000 security hold. The machine let out a sharp negative beep. The manager frowned slightly, trying the chip reader instead. Another sharp beep echoed through the quiet, elegant lobby. The manager looked up, his professional smile slipping into an expression of polite discomfort. "I am very sorry, sir," the manager said, keeping his voice carefully lowered. "It appears your financial institution has declined the authorization for the security deposit. Do you perhaps have an alternate method of payment we could try today?" Bradley turned the color of chalk. His jaw dropped open as he frantically patted down his pockets, searching for another card that had not already been frozen by the federal fraud alerts I knew were multiplying on his accounts. He leaned over the counter, his voice hissing with desperate anger. "Run it again," he ordered. "There is plenty of money in that account. I am a top-tier client. You must have a glitch in your cheap hotel system. Do you have any idea how much business I bring to this island? Run the card again before I have you fired for incompetence." The manager did not flinch. He slowly slid the plastic card back across the teakwood surface. "I have tried it 3 times, sir," the manager replied firmly. "The decline is absolute. We cannot release the keys to the presidential villas without a valid $20,000 authorization hold. If you cannot provide a working card, I will have to ask you to step aside so I can assist the other guests." Patricia let out a sound that was half gasp and half shriek. She spun around to face my mother, her face twisting into a furious, ugly tantrum. She stomped her expensive sandal against the marble floor. "Linda, you need to fix this right now!" Patricia screamed, completely ignoring the stares of the wealthy guests passing through the lobby. "Make Julia pay for the deposit. She sits in her cheap apartment, hoarding her meager little pennies while we actually live a lifestyle of luxury. She owes us for embarrassing Bradley on the flight. Force her to empty whatever pathetic savings account she has so we can get our villas. I absolutely refuse to stand here looking like some impoverished peasant in front of these elite resort guests. It is humiliating, and it is entirely your daughter's fault." My mother, still shell-shocked from the knowledge that she was about to lose her home, turned to me with a weak, trembling desperation. "Julia, please," Linda begged, her voice lacking its usual commanding authority. "Just put the deposit on whatever credit card you used for that airplane suite. Your brother is under an immense amount of stress right now. We cannot cause a scene in a place like this. Be a good sister and help him cover the hold. You can consider it your contribution to our anniversary trip." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure. She was literally begging me to finance the illusion of her golden child's success, even after learning he had stolen her home. I did not argue. I did not yell. I simply walked right past Bradley, Patricia, and my parents, bypassing the standard check-in counter entirely. I walked toward the private concierge desk reserved for elite property members. Before I even reached the desk, the heavy mahogany doors behind the reception area swung open. The resort general manager, a man who oversaw a staff of hundreds and catered exclusively to the global elite, rushed out into the lobby. He spotted me immediately. He practically jogged across the marble floor, stopping 2 feet away from me and bowing respectfully from the waist. "Welcome back, ma'am," the general manager said, his voice carrying clearly across the entire lobby. "It is an absolute honor to have you staying with us again. We were not expecting you until the winter season. I trust everything is prepared exactly to your liking. How may I assist you and your party today?" Bradley stopped breathing. Patricia's mouth hung open so wide I thought her jaw might unhinge. My parents stared at the general manager as if he had just spoken in an alien language. The man running one of the most exclusive resorts on the planet was treating their outcast daughter like royalty. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, giving the manager a polite nod. "There has been a slight change to my family's reservation. I will be authorizing the entire stay on my personal account. However, we need to adjust the room assignments immediately. My parents will take the oceanfront suite. I will be occupying the owner's penthouse. As for my brother and his wife, please cancel their presidential villas entirely. Put them in a standard economy room on the ground floor, specifically the one facing the loading dock and the commercial dumpsters." Marcus did not question the bizarre request. He simply nodded and waved over his senior concierge. "Right away, ma'am," Marcus agreed smoothly. "We will have their luggage sent to the service view room immediately. The penthouse has already been prepped for you. I will personally escort you to the private elevator whenever you are ready." Patricia let out a hysterical sob. "A standard room," she screeched, her face turning purple with rage. "Facing a dumpster. You cannot do this to us. Bradley, do something. Tell them who you are. Tell them we demand the villas." Bradley said absolutely nothing. He was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. The pieces were finally starting to click together in his panicked brain. The private airplane suite, the unlimited metal credit card, the resort general manager bowing to me. He was finally realizing that I was not the penniless travel blogger he had spent a decade mocking. I was the person pulling the strings of his reality. I turned my back on them and followed Marcus to the private elevator, leaving Bradley and Patricia standing in the lobby with their designer luggage waiting to be escorted to a room that smelled like hot garbage. My parents followed me in complete silence, too stunned and terrified to speak a single word. An hour later, I was floating in the crystal-clear water of the private rooftop pool attached to my penthouse. The Hawaiian sun was warm on my skin, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself relax. I knew the silence would not last, but I wanted to enjoy the brief respite before the final storm hit. Down below, in a dark, cramped room overlooking the resort's service entrance, Bradley was losing his mind. The smell of rotting fruit from the dumpsters wafted through the thin window panes, driving Patricia into a continuous screaming fit. But Bradley was not paying attention to his furious wife. He was pacing the stained carpet, his mind racing with terrifying possibilities. He needed to know how I was doing this. He needed to find my weak spot. He needed leverage to force me to give him money to save himself from the federal fraud charges that were looming over his head. When Patricia stormed out of the room to demand a manager, Bradley seized his opportunity. He slipped out of the standard room and made his way to the private elevator bank. Using a trick he had learned from a wealthy client years ago, he bypassed the security lock and rode the car up to the penthouse level. He crept down the plush hallway and found the heavy double doors to my suite slightly ajar, left open by the housekeeping staff, who were bringing up fresh towels. Bradley slipped inside the massive sunlit penthouse. He could hear the faint sound of splashing coming from the rooftop pool outside. Moving quickly and silently, he darted into the master bedroom. He saw my limited edition designer luggage sitting on the luggage rack. It was unlocked. Bradley dropped to his knees and began frantically rifling through my belongings. He tossed aside expensive silk clothing and luxury toiletries, searching desperately for a laptop, a bank statement, or anything that could explain my sudden impossible wealth. His hands brushed against something hard and heavy, hidden beneath a layer of sweaters at the bottom of the suitcase. He pulled it out. It was a thick black leather corporate dossier. The front cover was embossed with a silver crest. Bradley stared at the cover, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He stopped breathing. The blood rushed to his ears, creating a deafening roar. Embossed on the front of the highly confidential dossier was the exact name of the mainland investment firm he claimed to own. The same firm he had been embezzling from for years. The same firm that had just fired him and frozen all of his assets. Bradley opened the folder with violently shaking hands. The very first page was a corporate acquisition summary. It listed me, Julia, as the sole owner and majority shareholder of the parent company that had just purchased his entire firm. He was not just looking at his sister's financial records. He was looking at his new boss. Bradley scrambled to his feet, his fingers trembling so violently he could barely clasp the leather folder shut. He shoved the dossier back underneath my clothing, his mind spinning into a panicked vortex of self-preservation. He needed a weapon, a distraction, anything to destroy my credibility, before my parents discovered that their golden boy was completely bankrupt and facing total ruin. He ran down the penthouse corridor, slipping back into the dumpster view room, where Patricia was still furiously throwing a tantrum about the smell of garbage outside their window. Bradley slammed the door and threw the black leather folder onto the bed, his voice a frantic whisper as he laid out the truth. "Julia is hiding massive wealth," he panted, gripping his wife's shoulders. "She does not just run a blog, Patricia. She bought out my entire investment firm. She is the boss. If she hands her documentation over to the board, we lose absolutely everything." Patricia stared at the silver crest on the folder, her greedy eyes instantly narrowing as a malicious plan formed in her calculated mind. She did not feel remorse for her husband's crimes. She only felt a vicious burning rage that the sister they despised was holding all the power. They needed to make me look like a criminal before I could expose them. 2 hours later, the resort's open-air oceanfront restaurant was glowing with candlelight as wealthy guests gathered for dinner. My parents sat stiffly at a central table, vibrating with tension after the humiliating display at the check-in counter. I walked into the restaurant alone, wearing a simple white linen dress, completely unbothered by their hostile glares. I took my seat across from my father, who immediately checked his watch and let out a heavy, disappointed sigh. Before anyone could speak, Patricia made a theatrical entrance. She strode through the tables, loudly dragging a limited edition custom-made leather suitcase behind her. It was my exact luggage, a rare piece stamped with my company's private travel insignia. Bradley followed closely behind her, his face a tight mask of manufactured confidence, though his eyes were completely bloodshot with fear. Patricia slammed the heavy leather suitcase down right next to our dining table, deliberately knocking over a glass of water to draw the attention of the surrounding diners. "Look what I found sitting completely unattended in the lobby," Patricia announced loudly, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction as she looked at my mother. "Julia's bag. Except we all know Julia could never possibly afford a $5,000 piece of limited edition designer luggage on her pathetic little blogger salary. Bradley and I saw this exact set in a boutique in Paris last month, and it is reserved strictly for elite corporate executives. Your daughter clearly stole this right out of the penthouse lobby, Linda. She is desperately trying to parade around this luxury resort pretending she belongs, but she is nothing more than a thief who took what does not belong to her." My mother, Linda, instantly jumped to her teeth, her brittle social anxiety flaring at the thought of looking poor or scandalous in front of the resort's elite guests. She glared at me, her mouth pressed into a thin line of absolute disgust. "I knew it," Linda hissed, her voice carrying across the quiet, private dining section. "This is exactly like when you were a child, Julia. Always acting out, always trying to steal your brother's spotlight, because you could not handle his natural success. You have always been a closet kleptomaniac, hiding your jealousy behind spiteful behavior. You obviously scammed that manager into giving you the penthouse, and now you are stealing luxury goods from the other guests just to upstage Bradley's anniversary gift to us. Open the bag right now, Julia, before your father calls resort security to have you arrested." My father. Richard crossed his arms, tightly nodding in agreement with his wife's vicious accusations. "Your silence is an admission of guilt, Julia," my father stated coldly, his corporate lawyer voice taking over. "You have always lacked the integrity your brother possesses. Bradley works a legitimate high-stress job in finance while you spend your days playing dollhouse on the internet. You stole that bag to make yourself feel big, but you are still the exact same failure we cut off 5 years ago. Open it before I personally hand you over to the Maui police." Bradley stood behind them, a smug, desperate smirk returning to his sweating face. He truly believed that if they painted me as a common thief, the general manager would ignore the financial documentation I held. He thought his fake millionaire facade was safe. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I simply reached across the white tablecloth, gripped the handle of my custom suitcase, and pulled it toward my chair. With a slow, deliberate click, I flipped open the heavy gold latches. The surrounding tables grew entirely silent as the executives nearby watched our family drama unfold. I reached inside the luggage and pulled out the thick black leather corporate dossier that Bradley had snooped through just hours earlier. I laid it flat on the table right between my parents' champagne glasses. "I did not steal this bag, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through their screaming like ice. "And I certainly did not scam the manager. You have spent the last 9 years reinforcing the narrative that I am the family failure because I chose a different path than your golden boy. You cut me off financially, assuming I would starve. But what your narrow minds never bothered to understand is that my little travel blog did not stay a blog. It evolved. I used my audience to identify gaps in luxury hospitality markets. I began quietly acquiring boutique resorts, then regional boutique airlines, and finally prime commercial real estate. I opened the dossier, turning the pages slowly so my parents could see the multi-billion-dollar financial summaries stamped with my holding company's corporate seal. My mother's eyes widened to the size of saucers. My father's jaw dropped open completely, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch the verified asset balance sheets. My little travel blog evolved into a multi-billion-dollar luxury hospitality commercial development and aviation holding firm. I continued looking directly into my mother's stunned face. I do not need Bradley's frequent flyer miles. I do not need his pity, and I certainly do not need your inheritance, Father. I literally own the aviation group that flew us here today. I own the luxury holding company that manages this entire resort portfolio. I bypassed the front desk because I am the majority shareholder of the corporation that owns the land beneath your feet. Linda collapsed back into her chair, her face turning an interesting shade of white as she looked from the papers to my white dress. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Richard's professional composure completely shattered, his fingers trembling, as he realized the daughter he had treated like absolute garbage for 10 years was sitting on a global financial empire that made his entire lifestyle look completely pathetic. Patricia froze, her greedy fingers slipping off my leather suitcase as she stared at the multi-billion-dollar figures displayed on the digital printouts. She turned her head slowly, looking at Bradley with a sudden, terrifying look of suspicion. "Bradley," Patricia whispered, her voice cracking with tension. "What is going on? You told me she was a broke charity case. You told me your investment firm was the biggest player on the West Coast." Bradley did not answer her. He could not answer her. He was standing completely rigid, giant beads of sweat pouring down his temples and soaking straight through his expensive designer clothing. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows waiting for the rope to snap tight around his neck. I turned the final page of the black leather dossier. I looked at my brother, watching his eyes fill with a raw, primal terror as my fingers brushed against a crisp, white document bearing a federal government stamp. The surrounding diners were leaning forward now, the elite atmosphere of the restaurant completely replaced by the deadly weight of an impending corporate execution. "But I am not finished, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, quiet whisper that vibrated across the dining table. I pulled the final document from the folder and slid it directly in front of my father's plate. "There is one last piece of paper in this dossier that you should review, Dad. Since you love finance and results so much, you should see what your golden boy has been doing with his high-stress corporate career." My father reached out, his face contorted with confusion, as he picked up the official document. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the heavy legal jargon. Bradley took an involuntary step back, his boots squeaking against the tile floor as he looked at the exit, realizing there was absolutely nowhere left for him to hide. "This is an active federal indictment," I announced, looking directly into my brother's terrified eyes. "Issued by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. It lists absolute proof that Bradley has been systematically embezzling tens of millions of dollars from his own private clients for the last 3 years, running a massive Ponzi scheme just to fund his fake millionaire lifestyle and pay for your country club memberships. His firm did not collapse because of a bank error, Dad. It collapsed because the FBI is freezing every asset he owns tomorrow morning." The silence following my revelation was suffocating. My father stared at the federal indictment lying on the white tablecloth, his eyes tracking over the official government seals. For a fraction of a second, the truth broke through his reality. He saw the evidence of his son's monumental failure. But Richard had built his identity on superiority. To accept his golden boy was a federal criminal meant accepting he was wrong to discard me. He could not process the blow. His face hardened into a mask of pure, stubborn denial. He violently shoved the document back across the table, knocking over a silver salt shaker. He refused to even look at it. He turned to Bradley, who was standing frozen in place. Bradley trembled so violently that his designer watch rattled against his wrist. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a breathless wheeze escaped into the humid tropical air. Patricia looked frantically at her husband, her manicured fingers gripping the table edge until her knuckles turned bright white. She demanded Bradley say something to prove I was lying, begging him to threaten me with a defamation lawsuit to maintain the wealthy facade she depended on. But Bradley remained mute, his eyes darting toward the exits. My father, realizing the surrounding elite diners were watching our table with hushed curiosity, took drastic measures to seize control of the narrative. He needed to prove the Wilson family was unshakable. Richard abruptly pushed back his heavy wooden chair and stood up. He grabbed his champagne flute and tapped it loudly with his silver butter knife. The sharp ringing cut through the quiet murmur of the oceanfront restaurant. Diners slowly turned their heads, expecting a charming vacation speech. They had no idea they were about to witness a truly spectacular, career-ending implosion tonight. "I would like to make a toast," my father announced, projecting his booming corporate voice across the dining patio. He plastered an artificial smile onto his face, looking at the wealthy strangers instead of us. "Today marks 40 years of marriage to my beautiful wife, Linda. We built a wonderful life grounded in loyalty and trust. More importantly, I dedicate this toast to our son, Bradley." He gestured grandly toward my brother, ignoring the fact that Bradley was sweating profusely and looked physically ill. "Bradley is the true rock of this family. He is a brilliant investment banker, a devoted husband, and a man of impeccable integrity. We are incredibly proud of his massive success. He represents the best of our family legacy, always prioritizing our well-being." My mother nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with forced pride as she tried to ignore the federal indictment sitting inches from her plate. My father turned his icy gaze toward me, his eyes narrowing with pure malice. He lowered his voice, making sure neighboring tables heard every word. "It is a tragic reality that success breeds toxic jealousy within one's own bloodline. There are people who go to unimaginable lengths to tear down what others have built, fabricating psychotic lies and forging ridiculous documents for a pathetic ounce of attention. But we do not reward delusion. We reward absolute loyalty and genuine financial acumen. Therefore, to commemorate this 40-year anniversary, Linda and I have made a major decision. I am officially announcing it tonight to end these ridiculous rumors. Tomorrow morning, I am signing authorization forms to transfer the absolute entirety of our retirement fund into Bradley's firm. Every single last dollar we saved over 4 decades will be placed under his direct management. We trust him implicitly to protect our family wealth and secure our future completely." A polite smattering of applause rippled through the restaurant from guests, witnessing what they thought was family unity. At our table, the reaction was apocalyptic. My mother let out a breathless gasp, unaware that my father was making such a monumental pledge without consulting her. Patricia's face lit up with a ravenous glow, her eyes flashing with dollar signs as she imagined the influx of cash. She grabbed Bradley's arm, her suspicions vanishing under the promise of a massive payday. But Bradley did not smile at all. His knees buckled slightly. He gripped Patricia's chair to keep from collapsing, his face contorted into a mask of absolute horror. He stared at his father with wide, panicked eyes, looking like a man sentenced to the electric chair. He knew exactly what I knew. There was no firm left to manage their money, and there was no retirement fund left to transfer. I did not raise my voice to argue with my father. I did not defend myself against his vicious insults. I simply smiled a cold expression that made my mother flinch. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my smartphone. With deliberate movements, I opened the device settings. Because my holding company managed the resort, my phone possessed master override access to the property's digital infrastructure. I tapped the screen, pairing my device directly to the Bluetooth sound system wired throughout the private dining room. The soothing Hawaiian music abruptly cut off. A heavy, expectant silence blanketed the restaurant. Everyone looked around, confused by the sudden loss of music. I kept my eyes locked directly on my brother's sweating, terrified face. As I opened an encrypted audio file my security team extracted from his seized server, it was a voicemail. I pressed play, turning the volume up to maximum. A voice echoed through the hidden speakers, carrying clearly to every table in the restaurant. It was Bradley's voice. He was not speaking in his arrogant tone. He was sobbing with the pathetic desperation of a broken man begging for his life. "Please, Tony, I am begging you," his recorded voice wailed. "You have to give me another 30 days to come up with the cash. I missed the deadline, but I swear I am trying to move the funds." The market took a dive and my margin calls triggered. I cannot pull capital from the firm right now. The feds are sniffing around my quarterly reports. If they audit me, I am going to federal prison. Please do not send your guys to my house again. Patricia does not know anything. She thinks we are liquid. She will leave me if she finds out the cars are leased and the house is in foreclosure. Just give me one more month. I am begging you. The entire restaurant was frozen in shock. Diners stopped with forks halfway to their mouths, listening to the humiliating broadcast. My father stood perfectly still, his champagne flute hovering in the air. The color drained from his face as he recognized his son's pleading voice. My mother clamped her hands over her mouth. The recording continued delivering the fatal blow to their perfect illusion. "Tony, listen to me," the recorded, Bradley begged. "I do not have any other assets to liquidate. I drained my parents' retirement accounts 3 years ago to pay you back. I forged their signatures and wiped them clean. They think the money is sitting in an offshore bond, but it is gone. I have nothing left. If you tell them my father will disown me, and the feds will arrest me, I will get the 2 million. Just give me 30 days, I swear to God." The audio file ended with a sharp click. The heavy silence that descended upon the restaurant was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The awful truth hung in the tropical air, a toxic cloud that suffocated my family. My father slowly lowered his champagne flute, his hand shaking so violently that the crystal stem snapped against the edge of the table, shattering into pieces. He stared at Bradley, his chest heaving as the reality of his financial ruin penetrated his ego. His golden boy had actively robbed them blind. Every penny Richard and Linda saved over 40 years of work had been secretly squandered to pay off illicit debts. They were completely destitute. My mother let out an agonizing wail, collapsing onto the table and burying her face in her arms. She spent a decade treating me like a failure only to discover her son was a criminal who stole her future. Patricia backed away, her body rigid with revulsion. The greedy glow vanished from her face, replaced by pure horror. She looked at the man who promised her endless wealth. She finally understood why his credit cards declined and why they faced foreclosure. Every designer bag, luxury car, and vacation had been financed by theft. She was married to a broke criminal who owed millions to dangerous people. Bradley reached out his hands, trembling. "Patricia, please," he whispered. "I can explain." She did not let him finish. She pulled her arm back and delivered a vicious, open-handed slap across his face. The sound cracked like a whip. Bradley stumbled backward, clutching his red cheek as Patricia unleashed a furious scream, cursing him. Just as the chaos reached its peak, the heavy wooden doors swung open. Resort security stepped into the room. Walking directly behind them were 2 Maui police officers. The sudden arrival of law enforcement should have silenced my mother. Instead, it ignited a desperate, ferocious delusion within her. Linda launched herself forward, her expensive silk evening gown swishing violently as she physically placed herself between the 2 uniformed Maui police officers and her golden boy. Her face was flushed with an angry, mottled red, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, unyielding denial. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch that echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the oceanfront dining room. "Arrest her!" Linda shrieked completely, ignoring the sheer absurdity of her demand. "Arrest my daughter immediately. This is a targeted, vicious attack on our family. She is a jealous, spiteful liar who has spent her entire life trying to ruin her brother. That recording is completely fake. She used some sort of advanced computer program to fabricate his voice just to humiliate us. She is committing corporate espionage and harassment right in front of you." I remained perfectly still, watching the woman who had birthed me completely unravel in her desperate attempt to protect a criminal. I did not flinch or offer a single word of defense. I simply let her expose her own toxic reality to the entire room of wealthy diners. "You are dead to us, Julia," my mother screamed, her voice cracking as she turned her wrath entirely on me. Spit flying from her lips. "Do you hear me? You are permanently disowned. I am stripping your name from every single family record. You will never see a single dime of our money, and you will never set foot in our home again. You hacked his phone, you stole his private business documents, and you brought these people here to ruin our 40th anniversary trip. I want her in handcuffs, Linda demanded, turning back to the bewildered resort security guards and the stoic police officers. She is a dangerous, psychotic woman who is obsessed with destroying her highly successful brother. She is trying to steal his legacy. My father Richard finally found his voice, though it lacked any of its usual booming corporate authority. He stood up on shaky legs, his face completely pale, his eyes darting frantically between the police officers and his sweating, terrified son. "Officer, please," my father stammered, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "My wife is highly emotional right now, but she is absolutely correct. There has been a massive misunderstanding here tonight. My son is a respected investment banker with a flawless track record. He manages tens of millions of dollars for elite clients on the mainland. My daughter has clearly orchestrated a malicious smear campaign to damage his reputation. She stole private corporate property from his luggage and manufactured a fraudulent audio recording to cause a public scene. We demand that you remove her from these premises immediately so we can handle this as a private family matter." The two Maui police officers did not even blink at my parents' hysterical outbursts. They possessed the calm, cold professionalism of men who dealt with desperate criminals and their enabling enablers on a daily basis. The taller officer, a broad-shouldered man with a stern, unyielding expression, gently but firmly stepped around my screaming mother. He did not acknowledge her ridiculous demands. He did not look at my father, who was still trying to project an aura of wealth and control that no longer existed. The officer did not even look at me. He walked straight past the head of the table, his heavy boots thudding rhythmically against the polished wooden floorboards of the private dining room. His partner followed closely behind, his hand resting casually on his utility belt, his eyes scanning the room to ensure no one interfered. The entire restaurant watched in breathless, captivated silence as the officers completely bypassed the woman demanding my arrest and stopped directly in front of Bradley. Bradley looked like a man who had already died. His skin was the color of old parchment, slick with a cold, greasy sweat that completely ruined the collar of his expensive designer shirt. His breath hitched in his chest in shallow, erratic gasps, making his shoulders heave uncontrollably. He pressed his back against the mahogany wall of the restaurant, his hands gripping the edge of a nearby serving station, as if hoping the solid wood would magically swallow him whole and transport him away from the catastrophic ruin of his life. He could not look at his mother, who was still sobbing and yelling my name. He could not look at his father, whose face was rapidly transitioning from denial to absolute horror as the police officers boxed his golden child into the corner. Bradley could only stare blindly at the federal indictment lying on the white tablecloth, the official government seal glaring back at him like a death sentence. Patricia had retreated to the farthest corner of the dining alcove, pressing her hands tightly over her mouth to muffle her own terrified gasps. Her eyes were wide with absolute horror as she realized her entire life of unparalleled luxury was built on a fragile foundation of stolen money and federal crimes. She stared at the man she had married for his wealth, watching his arrogant facade dissolve into pathetic, trembling cowardice. She remembered the declined credit cards in the private airport lounge. She remembered the downgraded room facing the commercial dumpsters. Every red flag she had ignored in her pursuit of status suddenly snapped into sharp, unforgiving focus. She was married to a broke criminal who owed millions to dangerous people, and she was going to lose absolutely everything. Bradley Thomas, the taller officer, said, his voice echoing with absolute uncompromising authority that cut through the humid tropical air. "We are executing a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States Department of Justice, acting in direct coordination with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." My mother let out a blood-curdling scream, lunging forward to grab the officer's arm, but the second policeman smoothly intercepted her, holding her back with a firm, immovable grip. You cannot do this, Linda wailed, her voice cracking as tears of pure, unadulterated devastation streamed down her meticulously powdered cheeks. He is a good boy. He is a successful man. You are making a terrible mistake. Julia, tell them to stop. Tell them you made it all up. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, my face a mask of total indifference as I watched my brother's empire turn to ash. I am not making up anything, Mother, I said, my voice carrying effortlessly over her frantic sobbing. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not freeze bank accounts based on sisterly jealousy. They freeze them because your son has been running a massive Ponzi scheme for 3 years, defrauding his clients to pay for his luxury cars, his designer clothes, and your country club dues. He stole your entire retirement fund and he lost every single penny of it. You are completely bankrupt and he is going to federal prison. The word struck my father like a physical blow. Richard collapsed heavily into his wooden dining chair, all the air rushing out of his lungs in a sharp, pained wheeze. He stared blankly at the shattered remains of his champagne flute scattered across the table, his mind finally processing the absolute destruction of his legacy. His golden child was a fraud. His wealth was an illusion. His entire retirement was gone stolen by the son he had worshipped, while the daughter he had cruelly discarded sat across from him as a billionaire. The sheer magnitude of his failure paralyzed him entirely. The taller officer grabbed Bradley by the shoulder, forcefully spinning him around to face the mahogany wall. Bradley offered absolutely no physical resistance. He simply sagged forward, sobbing hysterically, as the cold steel handcuffs clicked sharply around his wrists. We received direct confirmation from the mainland 30 minutes ago. The officer stated, his voice ringing out so every wealthy guest in the dining room could hear the absolute truth. Your financial firm has completely collapsed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has officially frozen all your known corporate and personal assets. You are being detained immediately as a high-level flight risk. You do not have the right to remain on this property. Bradley wept openly, his tears mixing with the sweat pouring down his gray face, as the officers marched him away from the table. He was paraded through the center of the luxurious oceanfront restaurant, handcuffed and completely broken, while the entire dining room watched his humiliating downfall in absolute stunned silence. The carefully constructed illusion of wealth superiority and familial dominance had been permanently shattered. My parents finally understood the heavy price of their blind loyalty, and my brother realized that his pathetic reign over my life was officially finished forever. The silence following my revelation was suffocating. My father stared at the federal indictment lying on the white tablecloth, his eyes tracking over the official government seals. For a second, the truth broke through his reality. But Richard had built his identity on superiority. To accept his golden boy was a federal criminal meant accepting he was wrong to discard me. He could not process the blow. His face hardened into a mask of pure, stubborn denial. He shoved the document back across the table, knocking over a salt shaker. He refused to even look at it. He turned to Bradley, who was standing frozen in place. Bradley trembled so violently that his designer watch rattled against his wrist. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a breathless wheeze escaped into the humid tropical air. Patricia looked frantically at her husband, gripping the table edge until her knuckles turned white. She demanded Bradley say something to prove I was lying, begging him to threaten me with a defamation lawsuit to maintain the wealthy facade she depended on. But Bradley remained mute, his eyes darting toward the exits. My father, realizing the surrounding elite diners were watching our table with hushed curiosity, took drastic measures to seize control of the narrative. Richard abruptly pushed back his heavy wooden chair and stood up. He grabbed his champagne flute and tapped it loudly with his silver butter knife. The sharp ringing cut through the quiet murmur of the oceanfront restaurant. Diners slowly turned their heads, expecting a charming vacation speech. They had no idea they were about to witness a truly spectacular, massive implosion tonight. I would like to make a toast, my father announced, projecting his booming corporate voice across the dining patio. He plastered an artificial smile onto his face. Today marks 40 years of marriage to my beautiful wife Linda. We built a wonderful life grounded in loyalty and trust. More importantly, I dedicate this toast to our son Bradley. He gestured grandly toward my brother, ignoring the fact that Bradley was sweating profusely and looked physically ill. Bradley is the true rock of this family. He is a brilliant investment banker, a devoted husband, and a man of impeccable integrity. We are incredibly proud of his success. He represents the best of our family legacy, always prioritizing our well-being. My mother nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with forced pride, as she tried to ignore the federal indictment sitting inches from her plate. My father turned his icy gaze toward me, his eyes narrowing with pure malice. He lowered his voice. It is a tragic reality that success breeds toxic jealousy within one's own bloodline. There are people who go to unimaginable lengths to tear down what others have built, fabricating psychotic lies and forging ridiculous documents for a pathetic ounce of attention. But we do not reward delusion. We reward absolute loyalty and genuine financial acumen. Therefore, to commemorate this 40-year anniversary, Linda and I have made a major decision. I am officially announcing it tonight to end these ridiculous rumors. Tomorrow morning, I am signing authorization forms to transfer the absolute entirety of our retirement fund into Bradley's firm. Every dollar we saved over 40 years will be placed under his management. We trust him implicitly to protect our family wealth and secure our future completely. A polite smattering of applause rippled through the restaurant. At our table, the reaction was apocalyptic. My mother let out a breathless gasp, unaware that my father was making such a monumental pledge without consulting her. Patricia's face lit up with a ravenous glow, her eyes flashing with dollar signs as she imagined the influx of cash. She grabbed Bradley's arm, her suspicions vanishing under the promise of a massive payday. But Bradley did not smile at all. His knees buckled. He gripped a chair to keep from collapsing, his face contorted into a mask of absolute horror. He stared at his father with wide, panicked eyes, looking like a man sentenced to the electric chair. He knew exactly what I knew. There was no firm left to manage their money, and there was no retirement fund left to transfer. I did not raise my voice to argue with my father. I did not defend myself against his vicious insults. I simply smiled, a cold expression that made my mother flinch. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my smartphone. With deliberate movements, I opened the device settings. Because my holding company managed the resort, my phone possessed master override access to the property's digital infrastructure. I tapped the screen, pairing my device directly to the Bluetooth sound system wired throughout the private dining room. The soothing Hawaiian music abruptly cut off. A heavy, expectant silence blanketed the restaurant. Everyone looked around, confused by the sudden loss of music. I kept my eyes locked directly on my brother's sweating, terrified face as I opened an encrypted audio file my security team extracted from his seized server. It was a voicemail. I pressed play, turning the volume up to maximum. A voice echoed through the hidden speakers, carrying clearly to every table in the restaurant. It was Bradley's voice. He was not speaking in his arrogant tone. He was sobbing with the pathetic desperation of a broken man begging for his life. "Please, Tony, I am begging you," his recorded voice wailed. "You have to give me another 30 days to come up with the cash. I missed the deadline, but I swear I am trying to move the funds. The market took a dive, and my margin calls triggered. I cannot pull capital from the firm right now. The feds are sniffing around my quarterly reports. If they audit me, I am going to federal prison. Please do not send your guys to my house again. Patricia does not know anything. She thinks we are liquid. She will leave me if she finds out the cars are leased and the house is in foreclosure. Just give me one more month. I am begging you." The entire restaurant was frozen in shock. Diners stopped with forks halfway to their mouths, listening to the humiliating broadcast. My father stood perfectly still, his champagne flute hovering in the air. The color drained from his face as he recognized his son's pleading voice. My mother clamped her hands over her mouth. The recording continued, delivering the fatal blow to their perfect illusion. "Tony, listen to me," the recorded. Bradley begged. I do not have any other assets to liquidate. I drained my parents' retirement accounts 3 years ago to pay you back. I forged their signatures and wiped them clean. They think the money is sitting in an offshore bond, but it is gone. I have nothing left. If you tell them my father will disown me and the feds will arrest me, I will get the 2 million. Just give me 30 days, I swear to God. The audio file ended with a sharp click. The heavy silence that descended upon the restaurant was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The awful truth hung in the tropical air, a toxic cloud that suffocated my family. My father slowly lowered his champagne flute, his hand shaking so violently that the crystal stem snapped against the edge of the table, shattering into pieces. He stared at Bradley, his chest heaving as the reality of his financial ruin penetrated his ego. His golden boy had actively robbed them blind. Every penny Richard and Linda saved over 40 years of work had been secretly squandered to pay off illicit debts. They were completely destitute. My mother let out an agonizing wail, collapsing onto the table and burying her face in her arms. She spent a decade treating me like a failure only to discover her son was a criminal who stole her future. Patricia backed away, her body rigid with revulsion. The greedy glow vanished from her face, replaced by pure horror. She looked at the man who promised her endless wealth. She finally understood why his credit cards declined and why they faced foreclosure. Every designer bag, luxury car, and vacation had been financed by theft. She was completely married to a broke criminal who owed millions to dangerous people. Bradley reached out his hands, trembling. "Patricia, please," he whispered. "I can explain." She did not let him finish. She pulled her arm back and delivered a vicious, open-handed slap across his face. The sound cracked like a whip, echoing loudly against the glass windows. Bradley stumbled backward, clutching his red cheek as Patricia unleashed a furious scream, cursing him. Just as the chaos reached its absolute wild peak, the heavy wooden doors swung open. Resort security stepped into the room, their expressions deadly serious as they surveyed the escalating violence. Walking directly behind them were two local police officers, their dark uniforms a stark contrast to the bright tropical decor of the dining room. "You own his debt." Richard choked out the threat of a lawsuit, dying instantly in his dry throat. He stared at me, the blood completely draining from his face, until his skin matched the sterile cinderblock walls of the local Maui police station holding area. The arrogant threat of a civil lawsuit evaporated from his trembling lips, replaced by a suffocating heavy silence as the absolute gravity of my words crushed his remaining defiance. I did not just have the power to leave his precious golden boy rotting in a damp jail cell. I held the legal right to seize every asset Bradley had ever touched. I was the creditor. I was the one Tony and the underground loan sharks had sold the commercial paper to when they realized Bradley was a sinking ship. I owned the house in foreclosure. I owned his cars. I owned the staggering mountain of debt that had finally buried my brother. Linda watched her husband collapse into a molded plastic waiting chair. She looked from Richard to me, her breath hitching in her chest, as the absolute reality of our situation settled over her. There was no leverage left. There was no social standing to exploit, no financial threat they could leverage against me, and no manipulation tactic that could force my hand. I had systematically dismantled every single pillar of their manufactured superiority. The realization did not bring my mother to a place of remorse or quiet reflection. It broke her completely. Linda lunged forward, her hands balled into tight fists, her face twisting into a mask of pure hysterical venom. She stopped inches from my face, her chest heaving as she unleashed a decade of suppressed resentment. "You planned this," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a manic, unhinged energy. "You orchestrated this entire nightmare just to humiliate us. You have always been a spiteful, vindictive girl. You could never stand the fact that Bradley was naturally gifted. You could never accept that he was destined for greatness, while you were destined to be nothing more than a background character in his life. You think you are so clever sitting there with your billions, acting like you are the absolute victim. But we knew exactly what we were doing, Julia. We made a choice, and I would make the exact same choice again today. Richard tried to reach for her arm, a sudden look of warning flashing across his pale features. "Linda, stop!" he rasped, his legal instincts weakly trying to intervene. But Linda slapped his hand away, completely blinded by her own toxic rage. "No, Richard!" she screamed, pacing the small linoleum floor of the police station. "Let her hear it. Let her hear the absolute truth. You think you uncovered some massive secret about Bradley taking money, Julia? You think you are the only one who knew he was struggling? We knew. We have known for 10 years. 10? The air in the holding area grew thick. I did not move. I maintained my cold, steady gaze, allowing her to dig her own grave with every single word. "He came to us after his very first firm went under," Linda shouted, waving her arms frantically. "He was 25 years old and facing complete ruin. He needed capital to cover the losses and keep his reputation spotless. We did not have the liquid cash on hand at the time. But you did. You had that massive college trust fund sitting there waiting for you to waste it on some useless hospitality degree. You were talking about starting a travel blog. A blog, Julia. It was a pathetic pipe dream. Bradley was building a financial empire. He had connections. He had actual tangible potential." She stepped closer, her eyes flashing with cruel, unapologetic defiance. "So we let him take it," she confessed, her voice ringing off the concrete walls. "We authorized the transfer, we signed the paperwork as the trust administrators, and we let him drain your entire account to save his firm. We gave him your money because he deserved it more than you did. He had a real future. You were going to squander it anyway. We protected our family investment, and we covered it up because we knew you would throw a hysterical tantrum and ruin his momentum. We knew Bradley was skimming from other accounts later on to pay us back, but we looked the other way, because that is what a family does. We protect our own." My father buried his face in his hands, letting out a low, agonizing groan. He knew exactly what she had just done, but he was too paralyzed by his own ruin to stop her. Linda stood tall, her chest heaving, a triumphant, twisted smile spreading across her face. She truly believed that this revelation would somehow shatter me. She expected me to break down in tears, to scream, to finally show the emotional devastation she had spent my entire life trying to provoke. She wanted to prove that my current wealth meant nothing because they had still controlled my past. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I simply looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. "I know, Mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the sharp, cutting edge of a surgical scalpel. Linda's triumphant smile faltered, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What did you just say?" "I said I know," I repeated, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "I have known about the stolen trust fund for 5 years." The color completely drained from Linda's flushed cheeks. She took an involuntary step backward, her back hitting the edge of the plastic waiting chairs. "Did you honestly believe you were criminal masterminds?" I asked, my tone dripping with icy condescension. "Did you truly think I would just accept the bank error story you fed me when I went to pay my final tuition bill? You told me the market crashed and the fund was wiped out. You told me I had to drop out and figure it out myself. I spent 2 years waiting tables and cleaning hotel rooms just to survive. But I never stopped looking into what happened. The moment my hospitality company generated enough capital to hire a forensic accountant, I had them audit the original trust documents." Richard lowered his hands, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "They traced the wire transfers directly from my educational trust into Bradley's failing firm," I explained, watching the horror slowly dawn on my mother's face. "I saw your signatures on the authorization forms. I saw the deliberate falsification of the withdrawal requests. I saw the entire paper trail of how you stole my future to fund his fraudulent lifestyle." "Then why didn't you say anything?" Linda gasped, her voice trembling. "Why did you wait 5 years?" "Because calling you out back then would have only resulted in a messy family argument," I stated coldly. "I did not want an apology. I wanted undeniable leverage. I built my empire knowing that one day Bradley's incompetence would catch up to him. I waited patiently until he was so deep in debt that he could not breathe. I waited until you were entirely dependent on his fabricated success. I waited until I could buy his debt and hold his entire life in the palm of my hand." Linda shook her head, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "You are a monster," she whispered, backing away from me as if I were a venomous snake. "We are your parents. He is your blood. I am going to sue you. I am going to hire the best attorneys in the country and sue you for severe emotional distress. I will tell the judge that you orchestrated a deliberate campaign of psychological torture against this family." A cold, razor-sharp smile touched my lips. I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single manicured finger toward the upper corner of the holding area. Linda followed my gesture. Mounted flush against the concrete blocks positioned directly above the duty desk was a black dome-shaped police security camera. A small red light blinked steadily, indicating that the device was actively recording both high-definition video and pristine digital audio. "You are going to sue me?" I asked, my voice echoing with lethal amusement. "Mother, you might want to rethink your legal strategy considering what you just proudly confessed to on a live recorded police station security feed." Richard let out a strangled, panicked noise, jumping out of his chair. "That money wasn't entirely yours to manage," I whispered, the trap springing shut. "That trust fund was tied to a federal grant. By admitting you knowingly let Bradley drain it, you just confessed to federal fraud on a recorded police station camera. The FBI will see this." Linda collapsed onto the floor, her world now completely destroyed. Linda's collapse on the cold linoleum floor of the police station holding area was absolute. She crumpled into a heap of expensive silk, and regret, her manicured hands gripping her hair as she finally understood the catastrophic magnitude of her mistake. The small red light on the security camera blinked steadily above the duty desk, a silent witness to her spontaneous confession of federal fraud. Richard stood frozen in place, his face devoid of all color, his lawyer instincts screaming that they had just handed the Department of Justice a neatly wrapped conviction. The duty officer behind the reinforced glass window stood up from his chair. He did not ask if they needed assistance. He simply picked up his radio receiver, his eyes locked firmly on my parents, and requested 2 federal liaisons to the front desk immediately. The trap had permanently sealed their fate. I did not stay to watch the federal agents escort my parents into an interrogation room. I adjusted the strap of my handbag, turned my back on the people who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable disappointment, and walked out through the heavy glass doors of the station. The warm, humid air of the Maui night greeted me. I felt weightless. For 35 years I had carried the suffocating burden of their expectations, their constant comparisons, and their cruel dismissals. Now I had handed that burden back to them, wrapped in a mountain of insurmountable legal and financial ruin. They had sacrificed my future to build Bradley a golden pedestal, and I had just demolished it with an undeniable truth. The following morning, the tropical sun rose brightly over the luxury resort, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors of the open-air lobby. I sat at a corner table dressed in an elegant linen suit, sipping black coffee while reviewing digital acquisition contracts on my tablet. The resort staff moved quietly around me, offering deferential nods to the woman who literally owned the ground beneath their feet. I was finalizing the last phase of my corporate strategy, executing a hostile maneuver that would leave no stone unturned. My quiet morning was abruptly shattered by the sound of frantic footsteps slapping against the marble. I looked up to see Bradley storming through the lobby entrance, moving with the manic energy of a cornered animal. He looked terrible. His designer shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot from a night spent in a holding cell. Walking closely behind him was Patricia. Her face was pulled into a tight scowl, her eyes darting nervously around the luxurious lobby as if expecting the police to materialize again. I knew exactly how Bradley was walking free this morning. My security team had already briefed me. Patricia had spent the night liquidating a hidden offshore account she had secretly maintained behind Bradley's back. She had scrounged up exactly $100,000 to post his bail in cash. She had not done this out of unconditional love. She had done it out of pure greed. Patricia believed that despite the local embezzlement charges and frozen personal accounts, Bradley still maintained his lucrative position as a senior executive at a massive mainland investment firm. She desperately needed him to reassert his corporate dominance, retain his multi-million-dollar salary, and save her from a life of poverty. Bradley marched directly up to my table, slamming his trembling hands down onto the polished wood surface. The sudden noise echoed through the quiet lobby, drawing the startled attention of nearby guests. I did not flinch. I slowly lowered my coffee cup, maintaining a calm, impenetrable gaze as I looked up at my brother's red, sweating face. "You think you have won, Julia Bradley?" hissed his voice, vibrating with a desperate, manufactured arrogance. "You think handing a local police officer a folder of printed balance sheets makes you a mastermind? You are nothing but a vindictive monster who got lucky with a hospitality blog. You threw our parents to the wolves last night just to satisfy your pathetic inferiority complex. But you have drastically underestimated who you are dealing with." Patricia stepped up beside him, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Her eyes glared at me with pure venom. "Bradley is a senior executive at an institutional investment firm." She snapped, her voice shrill. "His partners manage billions in global capital. That little local injunction you orchestrated yesterday is a minor inconvenience. His corporate legal team is already flying out here to squash your ridiculous allegations. We are going to bury you in defamation lawsuits until you are forced to sell this stupid resort just to pay your legal fees." Bradley nodded vigorously, feeding off his wife's desperate delusion. He needed to prove he was still the untouchable golden boy who could crush his sister with a single phone call. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone, his fingers shaking as he unlocked the screen. "I am going to show you exactly what real power looks like, Julia," he sneered, leaning over the table so his face was inches from mine. "I am calling my senior managing partner right now. I am going to authorize our institutional accounts to completely destroy your little boutique company. By the time the markets close today, your stock will be worthless." He tapped the screen and activated the speakerphone, setting the device down on the table right next to my coffee cup. The dial tone echoed loudly in the quiet lobby. Bradley stood tall, puffing out his chest, trying to project the image of a ruthless Wall Street titan. Patricia smirked, waiting for the booming voice of a corporate billionaire to validate her husband's superiority. I remained silent, resting my hands on the table, watching the phone with a faint, chilling smile playing across my lips. After 3 rings, the line connected. A crisp, authoritative voice filled the lobby, projecting clearly from the small speaker. "This is Sterling," the voice announced. Sterling was the undisputed heavyweight of Bradley's mainland firm, a man notorious for his ruthless financial maneuvers. "Sterling it is, Bradley," my brother barked, forcing his voice into an unnaturally deep, commanding register. "I have a major corporate emergency. I need you to deploy our Tier 1 legal defense team to Maui immediately to handle a localized dispute. Furthermore, I need immediate administrative authorization to leverage our institutional capital against a hostile entity. I want full aggressive market pressure applied to a hospitality group operating out of this specific location right now." "Bradley, stop talking," Sterling interrupted. The senior partner's voice was devoid of its usual collegial warmth. It was cold, flat, and entirely professional. "I am not authorized to speak with you regarding firm resources, legal deployment, or institutional capital." Bradley frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He leaned closer to the phone, his arrogant posture faltering slightly. "What are you talking about, Sterling? You are the senior managing partner. We run the executive board together. I need you to authorize this deployment right now to protect my assets." "I am currently holding the line for the majority shareholder," Sterling stated, his voice cutting through Bradley's demands like a guillotine blade. "I am under strict legal instructions not to engage with terminated employees." "Terminated?" Patricia gasped, her hands dropping to her sides as the blood rushed from her face. Bradley stared at the phone, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. His brain simply could not process the words coming out of the speaker. "Good morning, ma'am," Sterling's voice rang out, shifting instantly from cold dismissal to absolute unwavering deference. "Are you currently on the line?" I leaned forward gracefully, bringing my face closer to the phone. I kept my eyes locked in a dead, unblinking stare with my brother. "Good morning, Sterling," I said, my voice smooth, steady, and vibrating with absolute authority. "I am on the line." Bradley stumbled backward, as if he had been physically struck in the chest. His eyes widened to the size of saucers, shifting frantically between me and the phone lying on the table. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless noise, clutching her designer handbag against her chest as the reality of the situation crashed down upon her. "Ma'am, the hostile takeover of the investment firm was finalized at dawn this morning," Sterling reported, delivering the final blow to my brother's manufactured reality. "Your holding company now officially controls 85% of the voting shares. The board of directors has been entirely restructured according to your explicit directives. Do you wish to proceed with the executive termination protocols we discussed yesterday afternoon?" I did not break eye contact with Bradley. I watched the last remaining shred of his ego dissolve into pure terror. He was not just broke. He was not just facing federal prison. He was currently standing in front of the new absolute owner of his entire professional universe. "Yes, Sterling," I replied, my voice echoing clearly across the marble lobby. "Terminate Bradley immediately. Strip him of all institutional equity, cancel his executive severance package entirely due to his breach of fiduciary duty, and lock him out of all corporate servers." "Understood, ma'am," Sterling replied, without a single moment of hesitation. "His access has been revoked." I reached out and tapped the red button on the screen, ending the call with a sharp, decisive click. The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley stood completely paralyzed, his mouth hanging open, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The multi-million-dollar job he had just desperately tried to use as a weapon against me no longer existed. The massive corporate backing he promised his greedy wife was gone. The firm he had used to steal millions from innocent clients now belonged entirely to the sister he had spent his whole life calling a pathetic, ugly failure. He was nothing but a disgraced, unemployed criminal standing in the lobby of a resort that I owned, waiting for the federal authorities to arrive and take him away forever. The dead silence in the lobby was absolute. The marble floors and towering glass windows of the resort seemed to magnify the utter devastation radiating from my brother. Bradley stared at the blank screen of his smartphone. The device slipped from his trembling, sweaty fingers and crashed onto the polished stone floor, the glass screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks that perfectly mirrored his destroyed life. He fell to his knees. He did not cry. He just let out a hollow, ragged wheeze, clutching his chest, as if his heart had physically stopped beating. The realization that he possessed absolutely nothing, no firm, no capital, no leverage, and no future, paralyzed him completely. Patricia stood frozen next to him. I watched her perfectly contoured face cycle through a rapid sequence of emotions. First came shock, her eyes wide as she stared at the broken phone. Then came absolute terror as the word federal registered in her mind, bringing visions of seized assets, frozen bank accounts, and orange jumpsuits. Finally, her features twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion. The illusion of the wealthy, powerful Wall Street titan she had married had just evaporated. Bradley was no longer her ticket to high society. He was a massive liability. She looked down at her husband kneeling on the floor. She did not kneel to comfort him. She did not offer a hand to help him up. Instead, she took a deliberate step backward, putting physical distance between herself and his failure. "You are absolutely pathetic." Patricia spat, her voice echoing sharply across the open lobby. Bradley flinched, looking up at her with red, desperate eyes. "Patty, please. I can fix this. I just need time to call some investors. I can start a new fund." "Start a new fund with what?" she shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "You have nothing. You stole your own parents' retirement. You owe millions to violent criminals. You just got fired on speakerphone by your own sister. You are a broke, disgraced felon, Bradley. I did not marry a criminal. I married a managing partner. You lied to me about everything. You promised me a lifestyle you could not afford, and you funded it with stolen money. I am filing for divorce the second I get back to the mainland. Do not ever speak to me again." Bradley reached out his hand, grasping blindly at the hem of her expensive designer dress. Please do not leave me. You are all I have left. The feds are coming. I need my wife. Patricia violently kicked his hand away with her sharp heel. I am not going down with a sinking ship. You are on your own. She literally stepped over his kneeling body. She adjusted the strap of her Birkin bag, took a deep breath, and turned her attention entirely to me. I remained seated at my table, my hands folded neatly over my tablet. I watched the miraculous transformation occur in real time. The vicious, screaming gold digger vanished instantly. Her shoulders slumped forward, her posture shrinking to appear small and incredibly fragile. She forced her eyes to widen, blinking rapidly, until tears spilled over her dark lashes, ruining her expensive mascara. She pressed a trembling hand against her chest, letting out a soft theatrical sob as she approached my table. It was a masterful performance, one she had clearly practiced for moments when she needed to manipulate wealthy targets. Julia, Patricia whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured vulnerability. Julia, you have to understand. I had absolutely no idea. I am in total shock right now. I tilted my head, offering her a cold, impassive stare. No idea about what, Patricia? About any of it, she cried, stepping closer and leaning heavily against the back of an empty chair. I swear to you, I did not know Bradley was stealing money. I thought his firm was wildly successful. He controlled all our finances. He controlled my entire life. He kept me in the dark. He manipulated me just like he manipulated your parents. I am a victim here, Julia. I am trapped in a marriage with a financial predator. A victim, I repeated, my tone utterly devoid of sympathy. You seemed quite happy to be a victim when you were spending $50,000 a month on luxury vacations and designer wardrobes. You did not ask too many questions when he bought you that ridiculous Mercedes. Because I trusted him. Patricia sobbed loudly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I am just an innocent wife who was completely deceived by a sociopath. And now my life is destroyed. My reputation is ruined. The press will drag my name through the mud when the federal indictment goes public. I have nothing left, Julia. He drained my personal accounts, too. I am completely destitute. She paused, taking a ragged breath, her eyes darting around the lobby to ensure we were still the center of attention. Then she executed the pivot she had been planning the moment she realized I was a billionaire. You have to help me, she pleaded, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You are a wealthy, powerful woman now. You own this entire resort. You own the parent company. You understand what it is like to be victimized by Bradley. We are both victims of his toxic ego. I need a fresh start, Julia. I need to get away from him and rebuild my life. And how exactly do you expect me to facilitate this fresh start? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Patricia straightened her posture slightly, the tears instantly drying up as we entered the negotiation phase. I need a settlement, a quiet, private financial settlement for the severe emotional distress your brother has caused me. I think $5 million is a fair number. It is a drop in the bucket for you. You wire $5 million into a private account, and I will walk away quietly. I will sign an airtight non-disclosure agreement. I will not talk to the press about your family drama. I will not mention how your parents stole your trust fund. I will just disappear and leave you to deal with Bradley's mess. She leaned closer, her eyes flashing with a familiar, greedy entitlement. If you do not pay me, Julia, I will have no choice but to go to the media. I will sell my story to the highest bidder. I will tell every news outlet in the country about the corrupt, fraudulent family behind your pristine corporate empire. Your shareholders will panic, your stock prices will plummet. $5 million is a very cheap price to pay for my silence. For a moment, the only sound in the lobby was the soft rustle of the palm trees outside. I looked at Patricia, taking in her smug, confident expression. She truly believed she had cornered me. She thought I was just like my parents, terrified of public scandal, willing to pay any price to maintain a flawless facade. She thought she could extort a billionaire with the same cheap threats she used on her desperate husband. I let out a low, echoing laugh. It started as a soft chuckle and grew into a sharp, genuine laugh that bounced off the marble walls. Patricia frowned, stepping back. What is so funny? I am not joking, Julia. I will absolutely destroy your public image. You are not going to do anything, Patricia. I said, my laughter subsiding into a cold, lethal calm. You are not going to the media. You are not going to demand a settlement. And you are certainly not getting a single penny from me. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thin, unmarked manila folder. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack right next to my coffee cup. Do you honestly believe I built a global corporate empire by letting small-minded extortionists back me into a corner? I asked, keeping my eyes locked on hers. When I authorized the hostile takeover of Bradley's firm, my first priority was not restructuring the board of directors. My first priority was deploying a team of ruthless forensic accountants to conduct a deep, granular audit of every single transaction that passed through his servers. I wanted to know exactly where every stolen dollar went. Patricia stared at the folder, a new, genuine terror creeping into her eyes. I do not know what that is. I told you I did not handle the finances. Stop lying, I commanded, my voice snapping like a whip. You are a terrible actress. Bradley may be an arrogant, incompetent thief, but he is also incredibly sloppy. He left a digital trail a mile wide, and my investigators followed that trail right to you. I flipped open the folder. The first page was a highly detailed financial schematic covered in red lines connecting various corporate accounts to offshore banking destinations. My team spent the last 48 hours tearing Bradley's financial history apart. I explained, tapping the paper. They discovered something very interesting. Bradley was embezzling client funds, yes, but he was losing that money to bad trades and underground loan sharks. He was constantly struggling for liquidity. Yet somehow massive sums of capital were quietly bleeding out of the firm's holding accounts, completely bypassing his margin calls. Patricia swallowed hard. She took another step back, her hands trembling violently. It turns out the desperate, victimized wife is quite the financial architect. I continued, turning to the next page. It displayed a series of bank statements from the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. This folder contains absolute, undeniable proof that for the past 3 years, you have been secretly siphoning money from Bradley's embezzled accounts. You set up a complex web of shell companies and offshore trusts in your maiden name. Whenever Bradley stole a large sum of client capital, you quietly skimmed 20% off the top and wired it directly to the Caribbean before he could blow it on the market. Bradley, still kneeling on the floor, jerked his head up. He stared at his wife, his mouth dropping open in total disbelief. "Patty," he croaked, "you stole from the firm. You stole the money I needed to pay Tony." "Shut up!" Patricia screamed at him, her panic finally breaking through her carefully managed exterior. She turned back to me, her chest heaving. "Those documents are fake. You forged them to frame me. Every single wire transfer is authenticated," I stated, closing the folder and resting my hand on top of it. "You stole nearly $4 million of federal funds. You did not just benefit from his crimes. You actively participated in a massive federal embezzlement scheme. You are a co-conspirator. You are just as guilty as he is." I picked up the folder and held it out toward her. "So here is your choice, Patricia," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. "You can march out of this resort right now, empty-handed. You can walk to the airport, fly back to the mainland, and pray that my forensic team decides not to forward these findings to the Department of Justice. Or you can stand here and threaten me with a lawsuit for a $5 million settlement. If you choose to sue me, or if you speak a single word of this to the press, I will hand this entire folder directly to the FBI agents who are currently en route to this hotel. They will freeze your offshore accounts by noon, and you will share a federal prison cell with your pathetic husband." Patricia stared at the folder as if it were a live grenade. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her skin a sickly ashen gray. Her jaw trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The realization that I held the absolute power to destroy her life instantly silenced her extortion attempt. She had thought she was the smartest person in the room, playing everyone for fools, but I had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. She looked at Bradley, who was staring at her with pure, hateful betrayal. Then she looked at the heavy glass doors of the lobby. Without a single word, Patricia turned on her heel. She practically ran across the marble floor, her expensive heels clicking frantically as she fled the resort, leaving her husband, her marriage, and her extortion attempt completely abandoned in the dust. The dead dial tone hummed from the phone, lying on the marble table, a continuous hollow frequency, signaling the absolute death of my brother's entire existence. Bradley stared at the device with vacant, glassy eyes. His knees buckled slightly, his expensive loafers scraping against the polished stone floor as he struggled to remain upright. The multi-million-dollar executive salary, the offshore investment portfolios, and the untouchable corporate prestige had all vanished into thin air. He possessed absolutely nothing. He was a disgraced, unemployed fraud waiting for the federal authorities to place him in handcuffs. He was entirely, completely ruined. Patricia stood frozen beside him. I watched her meticulously contoured face cycle through a rapid sequence of profound realizations. The shock of the phone call gave way to naked terror as the concept of federal prison registered in her mind. She looked at her husband, the one man she had married solely for his unlimited earning potential, and saw nothing but a massive radioactive liability. The illusion of the wealthy Wall Street titan was completely dead. He could no longer fund her extravagant lifestyle, and he was about to drag her down into a highly publicized catastrophic criminal trial permanently. She did not reach out to comfort him. She did not offer a single word of spousal support. Instead, Patricia took a deliberate step backward, putting stark physical distance between herself and his failure. "You are absolutely pathetic," Patricia spat, her voice ringing out sharply across the open lobby. Bradley flinched, snapping out of his catatonic trance. He looked up at her with red, desperate eyes, his hands reaching out in a pathetic plea. "Patty, please listen to me. I can fix this. I just need a few days to call some private investors. I can rebuild my entire firm, start a new fund with what." Patricia shrieked, her voice reaching a hysterical, frantic pitch. "You have nothing. You stole your own parents' retirement money. You owe millions to violent criminals. You just got fired on speakerphone by your own sister. You are a broke, disgraced felon." "Bradley, I did not marry a criminal. I married a managing partner. You lied to me about everything. You promised me a lifestyle you could not afford, and you funded it with stolen money. I am filing for divorce the second I get back to the mainland. Do not ever speak to me. Please do not leave me," Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "You are all I have left. The federal agents are coming. I need my wife." Patricia violently slapped his hand away. "I am not going down with a sinking ship. You are entirely on your own." She literally stepped around his trembling body. She adjusted the strap of her designer handbag, took a deep, shuddering breath, and turned her attention entirely to me. I remained seated at my table, my hands folded neatly over my tablet. I watched the miraculous transformation occur in real time today. The vicious, screaming gold digger vanished instantly. Her shoulders slumped forward, her posture shrinking to appear incredibly small and fragile. She forced her eyes to widen, blinking rapidly until tears spilled over her dark lashes, ruining her expensive makeup. She pressed a trembling hand against her chest, letting out a soft, theatrical sob as she approached my table. It was a masterful performance, one she had clearly practiced for moments when she needed to manipulate wealthy targets. "Julia," Patricia whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured vulnerability. "Julia, you have to understand. I had absolutely no idea. I am entirely shocked." I tilted my head, offering her a cold, impassive stare. "No idea about what, Patricia?" "About any of it," she cried, stepping closer and leaning heavily against the back of an empty chair. "I swear to you, I did not know Bradley was stealing money. I thought his firm was wildly successful. He controlled all our finances. He controlled my entire life. He kept me in the dark. He manipulated me just like he manipulated your parents. I am a victim here, Julia. I am trapped in a marriage with a financial predator. A victim," I repeated without any sympathy. "You seemed quite happy to be a victim when you were spending $50,000 a month on luxury vacations and designer wardrobes. You did not ask too many questions when he bought you that ridiculous luxury vehicle." Because I trusted him. Patricia sobbed loudly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I am just an innocent wife who was completely deceived by a sociopath. And now my life is destroyed. My reputation is ruined. The press will drag my name through the mud when the federal indictment goes public. I have nothing left, Julia. He drained my personal bank accounts. I am completely destitute. She paused, taking a ragged breath, her eyes darting around the lobby to ensure we were still the center of attention. Then she executed the pivot she had been planning the moment she realized I was a billionaire. You have to help me, she pleaded, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You are a wealthy, powerful woman now. You own this entire resort. You own the parent company. You understand what it is like to be victimized by Bradley. We are both victims of his toxic ego. I need a fresh start right now today. I need to get away from him and rebuild my life. And how exactly do you expect me to facilitate this fresh start? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Patricia straightened her posture slightly, the tears instantly drying up as we entered the negotiation phase. I need a settlement. A quiet, private financial settlement for the severe emotional distress your brother has caused me. I think $5 million is a fair number. It is a drop in the bucket for you. You wire $5 million into a private account, and I will walk away quietly without ever speaking. I will sign an airtight non-disclosure agreement. I will not talk to the press about your family drama. I will not mention how your parents stole your trust fund. I will just disappear and leave you to deal with Bradley's mess. She leaned closer, her eyes flashing with a familiar greedy entitlement. If you do not pay me, Julia, I will have no choice but to go to the media. I will sell my story to the highest bidder. I will tell every news outlet in the country about the corrupt, fraudulent family behind your pristine corporate empire business. Your shareholders will panic. Your stock prices will plummet. $5 million is a very cheap price to pay for my silence. For a moment, the only sound in the lobby was the soft rustle of the palm trees outside. I looked at Patricia, taking in her smug, confident expression. She truly believed she had cornered me. She thought I was just like my parents, terrified of public scandal, willing to pay any price to maintain a flawless facade. She thought she could extort a billionaire with the same cheap threats she used on her desperate, cowardly husband today forever. I let out a low, echoing laugh. It started as a soft chuckle and grew into a sharp, genuine laugh that bounced off the marble walls. Patricia frowned, stepping back. What is so funny? I am not joking, Julia. I will absolutely destroy your public image. You are not going to do anything, Patricia. I said, my laughter subsiding into a cold, lethal calm. You are not going to the media. You are not going to demand a settlement. And you are certainly not getting a single penny from me. I reached into my leather briefcase without breaking eye contact. I pulled out a thin, unmarked manila folder and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy smack right next to my coffee cup. Do you honestly believe I built a global corporate empire by letting small-minded extortionists back me into corners? I asked, locking my eyes on hers. My first priority after taking over Bradley's firm was deploying ruthless forensic accountants to conduct a deep, granular audit. I wanted to know exactly where every stolen dollar went. Patricia stared at the folder, genuine terror creeping into her eyes. I flipped open the cover to reveal everything. This folder contains absolute undeniable proof, I said. For the past 3 years, you have been secretly siphoning money from Bradley's embezzled accounts. You established offshore trusts in your maiden name. Whenever he stole client capital, you quietly skimmed 20% and wired it directly to the Caribbean. You are a massive co-conspirator. If you sue me for a settlement, I will hand this folder directly to the FBI today. They will freeze your accounts by noon. Patricia turned deathly pale, spun on her heel, and ran out the front lobby doors into the bright tropical sun, completely terrified. Patricia's frantic footsteps faded into the humid tropical morning, leaving a profound, heavy silence in the grand lobby of the resort. Bradley remained collapsed on the polished marble floor, his expensive suit wrinkled and damp with nervous sweat. He stared blankly at the empty space where his wife had just stood, completely paralyzed by the realization that his marriage, his career, and his freedom had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. He drew in a ragged, shuddering breath, wrapping his arms around his chest, as if trying to hold his shattered reality together. I sat motionless at my table, my hands resting lightly on the surface, feeling no pity for the man sobbing at my feet. He had built his entire existence on stolen money, and unearned arrogance and gravity had finally collected its debt. Before the resort security guards could step forward to remove Bradley from the premises, the heavy glass entrance doors slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss. My father marched into the lobby, his face an alarming shade of crimson. Linda trailed closely behind him, clutching her purse against her chest, her eyes darting nervously toward the onlookers, whispering in the lounge area. Richard had clearly realized that his empty threats at the police station were useless. He had watched me systematically dismantle his golden boy, and the utter loss of control was tearing him apart from the inside out. He could not accept that the daughter he had deemed a worthless background character was now the undisputed architect of his absolute ruin. Richard approached the table, kicking Bradley's discarded phone out of his way with the toe of his leather shoe. He did not look down at his weeping son. He locked his furious, bloodshot eyes entirely on me. His jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. He placed both of his hands flat on the table, leaning forward to invade my space, desperately trying to project the intimidating patriarchal authority that had dictated my entire childhood. "You have played a very dangerous game today, Julia," Richard growled, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly baritone. "You think you can just waltz in here with your corporate acquisitions and your fancy lawyers, wave a few bank statements around and dictate the terms of our survival. You think you hold all the cards because you managed to scrape together a holding company, but you have forgotten one fundamental truth about this family. You have forgotten who built the foundation you are currently standing on." I did not flinch. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, letting the silence stretch to highlight his powerlessness. "I built my own foundation, Richard," I replied deliberately, stripping him of his parental title. "You and your sons simply tried to steal the concrete." "Wrong." Richard snapped, his face contorting into a mask of supreme, unyielding arrogance. "Every single dollar you claim to own, every asset your little company possesses, is a direct derivative of the seed money we originally provided. And more importantly, it is a derivative of your grandfather's legacy. A legacy that was never legally yours to control." With a swift, dramatic motion, Richard reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored linen jacket. He pulled out a thick, folded document bound in a blue legal backing. He slammed it down onto the table with enough force to make my coffee cup rattle against its ceramic saucer. The paper looked slightly yellowed, artificially aged, to convey a sense of historical importance. "You thought you audited everything," Richard sneered, tapping his index finger aggressively against the blue cover. "You thought you uncovered all the family secrets when you tracked down that trust fund money. But you missed the most important document of all. This is the finalized, updated last will and testament of your late grandfather. He entrusted this specific document to me just weeks before he passed away, with strict instructions to only execute it in the event of an existential threat to the family empire." Linda stepped up to stand shoulder to shoulder with her husband. She lifted her chin, her face pulling into a tight, vindictive smile. She was feeding off his false confidence, fully believing that this piece of paper was their ultimate salvation. "Your grandfather was a traditional man," Linda said, her voice dripping with toxic condescension. "He believed in the preservation of generational wealth. He believed that the family legacy should always be protected by the male heir. He knew how emotional and erratic you could be. He explicitly stated that Bradley was the true successor to the bloodline." Richard unfolded the document and smoothed it out flat on the table, keeping his hand pressed firmly over the signature line. "This will legally supersedes any previous trust agreements," he declared, his voice rising in volume as he sought to dominate the space. "It contains an ironclad reversion clause. It specifically states that if the family's financial standing is ever threatened, the entirety of the estate, including all original trust disbursements, immediately reverts to the sole control of the male heir. That means Bradley. It means the money you used to start your pathetic hospitality blog technically belongs to your brother. Therefore, by extension of corporate law, your entire parent company legally belongs to us. I looked from the document to my father's desperate, sweating face. It was a play of staggering, breathtaking audacity. He was trying to use a dead man's memory to execute a hostile takeover of my life. I am going to file this document with the probate court by noon, Richard threatened, a cruel, victorious gleam returning to his eyes. I am going to file a massive civil lawsuit against your holding company for asset misappropriation. I will have a judge freeze every single one of your corporate accounts, your real estate holdings, and your personal bank accounts, pending a full investigation. Your shareholders will panic. Your board of directors will throw you out to protect their investments. You will have absolutely nothing. He leaned even closer, his hot breath washing over my face. Unless you sign a full surrender of your voting shares to Bradley right now, you sign the company over to us, you walk away with a small severance package, and we agree not to pursue criminal charges against you for stealing your brother's rightful inheritance. This is your only way out, Julia. Surrender the company or we destroy you. The sheer lunacy of his demand hung heavily in the air. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply stared at the piece of paper, feeling a profound sense of pity for a man so broken by his own ego that he would resort to such a sloppy, transparent fabrication. Before I could even formulate a response, the soft, melodic chime of the private VIP elevator echoed through the lobby. The polished silver doors slid open with a quiet, mechanical hum. Stepping out of the elevator was David. David was not just my partner in life. He was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in Manhattan. He had just flown 14 hours straight from New York to Maui, but he looked immaculate in a crisp charcoal suit, his presence commanding immediate and absolute respect. His eyes, sharp and analytical, swept across the lobby, registering the weeping Bradley on the floor and the hostile posture of my parents leaning over my table. David adjusted his grip on his leather briefcase and walked toward us with the measured, predatory stride of a shark circling wounded prey. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a polite greeting. He stepped directly behind my chair, placing a warm, reassuring hand on my shoulder, before turning his freezing gaze upon my father. Richard, David said, his voice smooth, resonant, and dripping with professional menace. I see you are attempting to practice law without a license again. A very dangerous hobby in this jurisdiction. Richard bristled, his face flushing darker. This is a private family matter. Back off. When you threaten my client and my partner with a frivolous civil lawsuit intended to freeze a publicly traded holding company, it becomes my matter, David countered smoothly. He did not wait for an invitation. He reached around me and picked up the document Richard had slammed on the table. Hey, Richard shouted, lunging forward to grab it back. You do not have authorization to review that. David easily sidestepped my father's clumsy grasp, holding the document up to the natural light streaming through the massive lobby windows. He did not read the entire page. His eyes darted directly to the bottom of the paper, scanning the legal citations and the notary seal. He examined the so-called updated will for exactly 3 seconds. With a dismissive scoff, David dropped the paper back onto the table. It landed next to my coffee cup, utterly defeated. If you are going to attempt corporate extortion, Richard, I highly suggest you hire better forgers. David stated, his tone clinically cold. This document is a magnificent display of amateur incompetence. Linda gasped, clutching her husband's arm. How dare you? That is a legally binding testament. It is a crude piece of printable cardstock you likely bought at a local office supply store, David corrected, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the bottom of the page. Let us begin with the notary stamp. The commission expiration date listed on that seal is 2028. Notary commissions in our home state are strictly limited to 4-year terms. A document supposedly signed and notarized by Julia's grandfather over 10 years ago cannot possibly feature a stamp from a commission that began a mere 2 years ago. Richard stared at the stamp, a bead of cold sweat tracing a path down his temple. He opened his mouth, but his vocal cords failed him. Furthermore, David continued, his voice echoing loudly enough for the resort security team to hear. If you direct your attention to Section 4, Paragraph 2, you will notice a citation for the Uniform Trust Decanting Act. You used this statute to justify the immediate reversion of the trust assets to the male heir. It is a very clever legal strategy, Richard. Unfortunately, that specific legislative act was not codified into state law until 3 full years after the date printed at the top of this document. Your dead father-in-law could not possibly cite a law that did not exist. The lobby fell completely silent. Even Bradley stopped his pathetic wheezing, looking up from the floor as the final nail was driven into his family's coffin. Linda's face turned ash white. She stumbled backward, bumping into a decorative marble pillar, her hands shaking violently as she realized they were completely trapped. David leaned forward, planting both hands firmly on the table. He looked my father directly in the eye, dropping all pretense of polite conversation. "You did not just bring a fake piece of paper to a resort," David said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "You knowingly presented a forged, testamentary document across state lines with the explicit verbal intent to extort controlling shares of a multi-billion-dollar corporate entity. That falls under the Federal Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Forging a legal document to extort a billionaire carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence in a high-security federal penitentiary." Richard froze forever. The silence following David's pronouncement was heavy. The word penitentiary hung between us, a brutal reality that shattered the armor of my father's arrogance. Richard did not argue. He did not raise his voice to offer another legal loophole. He looked at the forged paper lying on the marble table as if it had burst into flames. The blood drained from his face quickly. His jaw trembled, and the authoritative Wall Street patriarch vanished, replaced by a terrified man who suddenly realized he had no power left. He took a slow step backward, his hands falling limply to his sides. The realization that he had handed a top-tier litigator physical evidence of a federal crime broke him. Linda watched her husband retreat, and the last remnants of her condescension evaporated. Her manicured hands flew to her face, pressing against her cheeks, as a loud, guttural sob ripped through her throat. The facade was gone. The grand illusion of the untouchable superior family unit had been dismantled and incinerated. My mother looked at Bradley, still weeping quietly on the floor, and then she looked at Richard, staring blankly at the wall. The money was gone. The prestige was gone. The golden child was destined for a prison cell, and her husband was facing his own devastating criminal charges. They were entirely defeated. I sat perfectly still, watching tears stream down my mother's face. For 35 years I had craved her tears. I imagined a moment where she would finally understand the pain she had inflicted upon me. I dreamed of an apology. But now, watching her cry, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no triumph in watching them break. There was only a clinical detachment. Their tears were not born of remorse for how they treated their daughter. They were crying because they had lost. They were crying because they were finally facing the consequences of their own spectacular greed. "Julia, please," my mother wailed, stepping forward and reaching her hands across the table. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its usual sharp edge. She sounded desperate, frantic, and entirely broken. "Please, you have to stop this. This has gone too far. We are your family. We are your flesh and blood. You cannot let your lawyer send your father to prison. You cannot do this to us." I looked at her outstretched hands but did not move. "You did this to yourselves, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I did not force Bradley to embezzle millions. I did not force you to lie about my trust fund. I certainly did not force Dad to forge a legal document and extort my company. Every single thing happening right now is the direct result of your own choices." Richard found his voice, though it was nothing more than a raspy, defeated whisper. He leaned heavily against a chair, his shoulders slumped in total surrender. "Julia, we are sorry." He choked out his eyes. darting nervously toward David, who remained standing behind me like a silent sentinel. We made a mistake. We panicked. We were just trying to protect Bradley. We were trying to protect the family name. We lost our way. Just tell your lawyer to destroy that paper. We will drop everything. We will never bother your company again. I swear to you. He swallowed hard, wiping cold sweat from his forehead. Just let us go home, Julia, he begged. Let us just go back to the mainland. We will go back to our house, and we will leave you alone. We can just pretend none of this ever happened. We can be a family again. A real family. We can start over. The sheer audacity of his request was staggering. After decades of emotional abuse, after stealing my inheritance, after trying to orchestrate my financial ruin, he honestly believed he could just press a reset button. He believed shedding a few tears and offering a hollow apology would erase a lifetime of calculated cruelty. They did not want to be a family. They just wanted to escape the blast radius of their own explosive failures. Linda nodded vigorously, catching on to her husband's desperate pivot. Yes, Julia, exactly, she sobbed, forcing a wavering, tearful smile. We just need to go home. We are exhausted. We are terrified. We just need to get back to our own house where it is safe. We will deal with Bradley's legal issues privately. We will figure it out. But we need to leave this island today. She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her purse. The panic in her voice was momentarily replaced by a deeply ingrained, almost reflexive entitlement. But our accounts are still frozen, she continued, sniffing loudly. Bradley's firm locked down all our corporate cards and my personal credit lines are declining. We cannot even book a flight out of here. She looked at me, her tear-stained face pulling into an expression of expectant demand. You need to book our flights, Julia. You own this resort, you have infinite resources. Just call your assistant and book us 3 first-class tickets back to New York. Book them for this afternoon. Have a private car take us to the airport. It is the least you can do after putting us through this nightmare. Just get us first-class tickets so we can go home and put this horrible vacation behind us. We will go back to our sanctuary, and we will never bother you again. I stared at my mother, completely mesmerized by the sheer magnitude of her delusion and the astonishing depth of her denial. Her world was literally collapsing around her. Her son was facing federal indictment. Her husband had just committed a felony in front of a corporate litigator, and her primary concern was securing premium seating on a commercial airline. She still viewed me as a utility, a resource to be deployed whenever she encountered an inconvenience. Even in her absolute defeat, she could not turn off her demanding programming. She wanted to retreat to her massive suburban mansion, lock the doors, and pretend her life was still intact. I slowly shook my head. The faint, chilling smile that crossed my lips made my mother's fake, hopeful expression falter. I am not booking you a flight, Mom, I said quietly, looking her directly in the eyes. And I am certainly not booking you first-class tickets. Richard slammed his fist weakly against the chair. Damn it, Julia, stop being so vindictive, he barked, a brief flash of his old temper breaking through his fear. We are stranded here. We have no money. We are just asking you to send us home. Is that so difficult for you to understand? We just want to go back to our house. That is exactly the problem, Richard David interrupted. His voice was smooth and perfectly measured, slicing through my father's rising anger like a scalpel. You keep demanding to go home today. You keep talking about retreating to your safe sanctuary. David reached into his sleek leather briefcase. He bypassed the forged will still sitting on the marble table and pulled out a fresh, heavily stapled legal packet. It was bound in thick white paper, bearing the official seal of a New York judicial court. He did not toss this document onto the table. He held it out directly to my father, forcing Richard to reach out and take it with trembling fingers. You might want to read the first page of that packet before you start making travel arrangements, David suggested, crossing his arms over his chest. Because booking a flight back to New York would be a colossal waste of your time. Linda crowded in next to her husband, her eyes scanning the bold black text printed at the top of the official document. She let out a sharp gasp. The paper in Richard's shaking hands was not a settlement offer. It was not a non-disclosure agreement. It was a formal, legally binding eviction notice. Richard stared at the bold print, his lips moving silently as he read the words over and over again, unable to process the brutal legal reality staring back at him. His eyes widened, and he looked up at me, his face completely devoid of color. "What is this?" he breathed, the paper rattling loudly in his grip. "This says our property has been foreclosed. This says we have 48 hours to vacate the premises. This is impossible. The mortgage is paid through Bradley's corporate account." "Was paid through his corporate account," I corrected him calmly. "Bradley used embezzled funds to pay the massive mortgage on your estate. When I ordered the forensic audit, we discovered the fraudulent structure. My team notified the bank. They flagged the account for fraud and initiated immediate foreclosure. So the bank was seizing the home anyway. I simply bought the foreclosed property from them yesterday. You literally have absolutely no home." The piece of paper slipped from Richard's trembling fingers, fluttering like a dead leaf, before coming to rest on the cold marble floor. The foreclosure notice was the final lethal blow to a towering monument of lifelong arrogance. He stared blankly at the document, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The man who had spent 35 years dictating every facet of my existence, who had wielded his financial superiority like a weapon to keep me subjugated, was now staring at absolute ruin. His sprawling estate, the ultimate symbol of his success, and the very stage where he had orchestrated my countless humiliations, belonged to me. The bank had not just taken his sanctuary. I had bought it out from under him. I owned the walls that had echoed with his constant criticism. I owned the dining room where Linda had relentlessly mocked my career choices during every family holiday. Linda let out a sound that I had never heard a human being make before. It was a high, strangled keen, the noise of a terrified animal caught in a steel trap. She dropped to her knees right there in the center of the immaculate resort lobby. The plush carpeting beneath her designer knees offered absolutely no comfort. She grabbed the edge of my marble table, her perfectly manicured fingernails scraping harshly against the stone. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were completely wide and vacant. She looked from me to David, then down to her husband, who was now clutching his chest as if struggling to draw oxygen into his collapsing lungs. Bradley, who had remained frozen on the floor since Patricia abandoned him, finally snapped out of his catatonic shock. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, dragging his ruined designer suit across the polished floor until he was positioned right next to our mother. The golden child, the brilliant financial prodigy who could do no wrong, looked like a frightened toddler. His face was slick with sweat and tears, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Julia, please," Bradley gasped, reaching a trembling hand out to touch the hem of my linen skirt. I pulled my leg back immediately, refusing to let him make physical contact. "Please, you have to fix this. You have to fix all of it right now. I owe Tony $3 million. They are going to kill me, Julia. The feds are going to lock me up, and Tony's guys are going to kill me before I even make it to trial. Patty took the only money I had left. You have billions in capital. You can pay them off. You can buy the firm back from the holding company. You can give Mom and Dad their house back today. Just write a check, one single check, and this entire nightmare goes away permanently." Richard, watching his golden son beg, finally broke completely. The rigid, intimidating patriarch dissolved right in front of my eyes. He sank down heavily onto his knees beside Bradley and Linda. The sight of all three of them kneeling before me in the middle of my luxury resort was surreal. Guests and resort staff were actively staring now, stopping in the grand lobby to witness the spectacular collapse of a wealthy family. But my parents did not care about the public humiliation anymore. The threat of impending poverty and federal prison had entirely eradicated their fragile pride. "Julia, listen to us," Linda pleaded, her voice cracking as tears carved deep tracks through her expensive foundation. "We were wrong. We were so horribly wrong about you. We see that clearly now. You are brilliant. You are incredible. You are the absolute most successful person this family has ever produced in its entire history. We are so incredibly proud of you." The word proud hung heavily in the air, dripping with an agonizing irony. For over 3 decades, I had starved for that exact word. I had practically killed myself working double shifts, skipping meals, and building my business from scratch, just to earn a fraction of the praise they showered on Bradley for simply existing. Hearing it now, violently ripped from her throat, by the jaws of financial desperation, made me feel physically sick to my stomach. "We will make it up to you." Richard added, his voice a pathetic, gravelly wheeze, as he looked up at me from his knees. "We will treat you with the massive respect you truly deserve. We will make you the undisputed head of the family, Julia. You can make all the executive decisions. We will listen to whatever you say without any argument. You will be the golden child. We will honor you every single day. Just please do not let them put me in a federal penitentiary for that forged document. Do not take our family home away. We are your parents. We love you. We have always loved you deep down. We just did not know how to adequately show it. Please, Julia, save your family from total destruction." Bradley nodded frantically, his hands clasped together tightly, as if in desperate prayer. "I will work for you, Julia. I will do whatever you want me to do. I will be your personal assistant. I will literally scrub your corporate floors. Just pay off the criminal debt. You are my big sister. You are naturally supposed to protect me. I am so deeply sorry for everything cruel I ever said to you. I will never call you an ugly failure ever again. I swear it. I will practically worship the ground you walk on for the rest of my life. Just save my life before it is completely over." I sat back in my chair, looking down at the 3 people kneeling at my feet. They were offering me the ultimate prize, the unconditional love and supreme respect I had blindly chased for my entire youth. They were offering to violently dethrone Bradley and place me permanently on the golden pedestal. They thought this was a highly brilliant negotiation tactic. They arrogantly assumed my inner child was still desperate enough to trade my hard-earned billions for their incredibly toxic, highly conditional affection. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were wide with a frantic, greedy hope. I looked at my father, who was trembling like a beaten, cornered animal. I looked at Bradley, who was practically hyperventilating on the floor. "You genuinely want to make me the golden child?" I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent lobby. "You want to suddenly declare me the head of the family, as if that is some grand, prestigious title I should be immensely grateful to accept. You are offering me your fake love and respect with a massive price tag attached. You want me to buy your affection by paying off your severe criminal debts and returning a luxury house that you lost through your own staggering incompetence." I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms gracefully on the cool marble table. David stood perfectly still beside me, a silent, imposing guardian, watching the brutal execution of pure justice. "You do not love me, Mom." I continued, my piercing gaze locking onto hers, watching her fake, hopeful smile instantly falter. "You love my massive bank account. You do not respect me, Dad. You respect the ruthless forensic accountants and the federal agents I can effortlessly unleash on you. You do not want a caring sister, Bradley. You want a human shield to step between you and the extremely violent loan sharks you foolishly decided to rob blind. You are not offering me a loving family. You are offering me a transactional hostage situation, and I am firmly declining the terms." Linda let out another sharp, agonizing sob, reaching her hands forward again. "Julia, no, you absolutely cannot mean that. We are begging you for mercy. You are begging the completely wrong person," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, absolute calm. "You spent 35 years actively telling me that I was a worthless failure, that my business was a pathetic little hobby, and that I would never amount to anything real in the corporate world. You demanded that I learn harsh independence. You constantly demanded that I face the severe consequences of my own actions without ever expecting a handout from anyone else. Well, I learned the difficult lesson perfectly, and now it is finally your turn to learn it." The reality of my rejection crushed them. Their frantic pleading died, replaced by suffocating realization. The safety net was gone. I reached down, picking up my designer leather bag. I retrieved a crisp white envelope and tossed it onto the table. It slid directly in front of Bradley. He opened it, pulling out 3 boarding passes. He looked up, his face entirely blank. "Economy," he whispered. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of closure. "Economy," I repeated. "Do not complain. This is all you can handle." Bradley stared at the thin pieces of paper in his hands, as if they were written in a completely foreign language. The glossy, colorful world he had inhabited for his entire life was instantly reduced to a cramped seat in coach wedged next to the very people he had just thrown under the bus. Linda opened her mouth to argue, her eyes darting frantically toward the resort exit, but the fight had completely left her body. She looked at Richard, waiting for the patriarch to unleash his booming voice and demand better treatment. But Richard was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped, looking 20 years older than he had when he first marched through the glass doors. David signaled with a subtle nod, and 3 resort security guards stepped forward, pushing a brass luggage cart carrying my parents' expensive, oversized suitcases. "We took the liberty of packing your belongings," David said, his tone clinically polite. "A shuttle is waiting at the main entrance to take you directly to the airport. Your flight departs in exactly 3 hours. I strongly suggest you do not miss it." Linda reached out, her fingers trembling as she grabbed Richard's sleeve. Richard did not look at her. He finally looked up at me, his eyes hollow and defeated. "Julia," he started, his voice cracking. "Do not speak." I interrupted, my voice slicing through the humid air of the lobby. "This is the last time you will ever hear my voice, and I need you to listen very carefully. You are leaving this island, and you are returning to a reality you created. You will face the federal investigators. You will face the foreclosure. You will face the absolute destruction of your social standing. I am not saving you from the consequences of your greed. However, I am not a monster. I am not the heartless villain you have always painted me to be." I paused, making sure every word sank into their desperate minds. "I have set up an anonymous trust. It will pay the rent on a modest apartment for Mom and Dad. It will provide a strict, unalterable monthly stipend for groceries and basic utilities. You will not starve and you will not be homeless. But that is the absolute limit of my generosity. You will never know the name of the trust. You will never have access to the principal. And most importantly, you will never contact me again." My parents stared at me, the reality of my ironclad boundary crashing down upon them. They had spent their entire lives treating me as an afterthought, an emotional punching bag to elevate their own fragile egos. Now their literal survival depended on the charity of the daughter they had abused. "If you attempt to call me," I continued, my gaze moving from my mother to my father, and finally resting on Bradley. "If you try to email me, if you approach my offices, or if you attempt to use my name in the press or in your legal defense, the trust will be dissolved immediately. The funding will stop permanently, and you will be completely on your own. Do you understand?" Richard nodded slowly, a single tear escaping his eye and rolling down his cheek. He had spent his entire life trying to control me, and now his very survival depended entirely on my terms. There was no negotiation left. There were no more threats he could leverage. He was a broken man standing in the ruins of his own empire. Bradley clutched the boarding passes to his chest, pushing himself up from the floor. He looked at me with a mixture of absolute terror and bitter resignation, finally realizing that his charm and his golden boy status were utterly useless in the face of federal law. He had spent his life believing he was untouchable, protected by our parents' endless financial bailouts. Now he was facing a future where none of those safety nets existed. David gestured toward the doors. "The shuttle is waiting." They turned away. I watched them shuffle across the grand lobby. They did not look like wealthy socialites or powerful corporate figures. They looked like strangers hollowed out by their own arrogance, marching toward the exit of a world they no longer belonged in. The automatic glass doors hissed open, and the humid tropical air swallowed them. As they climbed into the waiting shuttle, I did not feel a sudden surge of vindication. I did not feel the dramatic thrill of revenge. I simply felt an overwhelming, magnificent silence. The heavy, suffocating noise of my childhood had finally been silenced. 6 months later, the dust from their spectacular collapse had settled into a permanent, inescapable reality. The justice they faced was cold, precise, and entirely of their own making. Bradley had tried to leverage his charm and his Ivy League connections to negotiate a plea deal, but the federal prosecutors were completely immune to his smile. The forensic audit provided by my team, combined with Patricia's ruthless cooperation to save herself, left him with absolutely no defense. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. He was currently serving a 72-month sentence in a medium-security federal facility in Pennsylvania. The tailored linen suits and expensive watches were replaced by a standard-issue uniform. There were no VIP lounges, no corporate expense accounts, and no parents to bail him out. He was finally forced to face the exact consequences he had spent his entire life dodging. Patricia had divorced him with breathtaking speed. The moment she realized the money was gone, she severed all ties, publicly playing the role of the betrayed, heartbroken wife. She attempted to pivot her lifestyle blog into a survival story, trying to monetize her proximity to the scandal. Unfortunately for Patricia, her aggressive ignorance of Bradley's finances did not protect her from the Internal Revenue Service. The feds initiated a massive, exhaustive audit of her personal accounts and her blog's revenue streams. They seized her remaining assets to cover the back taxes on the lavish gifts and undeclared income Bradley had funneled her way. She was currently living in a cramped studio apartment, entirely disgraced, working a mid-level marketing job she despised, desperately trying to hide from the very social circles she used to dominate. Richard and Linda's fall from grace was perhaps the most theatrical. The foreclosure of their massive suburban estate was finalized in record time. The bank auctioned off their luxury cars, their antique furniture, and the expensive art collection Richard had always bragged about. The prestigious country club, the absolute center of their social universe, revoked their membership within days of Bradley's indictment. The wealthy friends they had spent decades impressing abandoned them instantly, refusing to answer their calls or acknowledge them in public. High society has a very low tolerance for federal crimes and sudden poverty. They were currently living in a tiny rental apartment in New Jersey. The walls were thin, the appliances outdated, and the view from their single window was a dirty brick wall instead of the rolling, manicured lawns they were accustomed to. Every month their rent was paid precisely on time by a faceless, nameless corporate trust. A modest grocery stipend arrived on a prepaid debit card. They had a roof over their heads and food in their pantry, courtesy of the daughter they had treated like absolute garbage. They spent their days sitting in a cramped living room surrounded by the crushing silence of their ruined legacy. They knew I was the one keeping them alive, and they knew they could never reach out to say thank you. The absolute ironclad boundary I had established remained unbroken. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, forced to survive on the charity of the scapegoat they had tried to destroy. They had begged to be a family again, but they had fundamentally misunderstood that a family requires love, and all they had ever offered was control. The Mediterranean sun was a brilliant, blinding gold as it reflected off the azure waters of the Amalfi Coast. I stood on the expansive marble balcony of my newest acquisition, a pristine, historic cliffside resort that we had just spent the last 6 months renovating into a world-class luxury destination. The sea breeze carried the scent of lemon groves and salt water washing over me like a cleansing breath. Below the balcony, the resort staff was busy preparing for the grand opening gala scheduled for that evening. The sparkling infinity pools cascaded down the tiered cliffs, and the pristine white cabanas gleamed in the afternoon light. It was a masterpiece of hospitality, a crown jewel in my rapidly expanding corporate portfolio. I leaned against the smooth stone railing, holding a flute of sparkling water, letting the profound peace of the moment sink into my bones. There was no anxiety tightening my chest. There was no lingering voice of criticism whispering in my ear telling me I was a disappointment. The toxic programming of my childhood had been entirely uninstalled, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. I had spent years analyzing my own worth through the distorted lens of my parents' conditional affection. Now looking out over the empire I had built, I realized their opinions were simply irrelevant background noise. The heavy wooden doors of the suite opened behind me, and I heard the familiar, reassuring rhythm of David's footsteps. He stepped onto the balcony, looking immaculate in a tailored navy suit that perfectly contrasted with the bright Mediterranean backdrop. He walked up beside me, wrapping a warm, strong arm around my waist and pressing a soft kiss to my temple. His presence grounded me, a constant reminder that I had chosen a partner who valued my strength rather than fearing it. The final permits just cleared the local municipality. David said, his voice a comforting, resonant rumble against my hair. The local government is thrilled with the restoration work. The press coverage is overwhelmingly positive, and we are completely booked for the next 18 months. You have officially outdone yourself this time, Julia. Your vision for this property was flawless from the very beginning. I leaned into his embrace, resting my head against his shoulder. We outdid ourselves, I corrected him, looking up at his sharp, analytical eyes that always looked at me with absolute respect and genuine admiration. I could not have navigated the international zoning laws without your legal team running interference. You kept the local politicians in line while I focused on the design. David smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression that he rarely showed in the courtroom. We make a terrifyingly effective team, he agreed. We know exactly how to leverage our strengths. I handle the legal battles and you build the masterpieces. From inside the suite, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted out onto the balcony. My executive team had gathered in the main lounge to celebrate the successful launch. There was Sarah, my brilliant chief financial officer, who had meticulously tracked down Bradley's embezzlement and secured my corporate holdings. There was Marcus, my head of acquisitions, who had spotted the incredible potential in this cliffside property when everyone else thought it was a lost cause. There was Elena, my operations director, whose ruthless efficiency matched my own and ensured the resort opened ahead of schedule. We were sharing stories, drinking expensive champagne, and celebrating our shared victory. They were not just my employees. They were my true chosen family. They were a group of people built on mutual respect, shared ambition, and absolute loyalty. There was no golden child among us. There was no scapegoat assigned to carry the emotional burdens of the group. We earned our places at the table through hard work and undeniable integrity, lifting each other up instead of tearing each other down. When Sarah found a discrepancy, we fixed it. When Marcus found an opportunity, we funded it. When Elena needed resources, I provided them. We functioned as a seamless, powerful unit completely devoid of the toxic manipulation that had defined my biological family. I looked back out at the endless expanse of the ocean. My biological family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They had tried to compress me into a tiny, insignificant box so they could stand on top of it and feel taller. They had starved me of affection, mocked my ambitions, and ultimately tried to steal the very foundation I had built with my own bleeding hands. They believed that breaking my spirit would ensure their continued dominance, but their relentless cruelty had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. Every insult they hurled at me had become fuel. Every time they told me I was a failure, it hardened my resolve to succeed. The profound lack of love and support in my childhood home did not break me. It forged me into someone entirely unbreakable. It taught me how to survive in the harshest conditions. It taught me how to analyze risks, how to spot manipulation from a mile away, and how to build an armor so thick that no one could ever penetrate it. Their attempts to destroy me were exactly what pushed me to build an empire too vast, too powerful, and too legally secure for them to ever touch. They had tried to bury me, not realizing they were simply planting a seed. Now I had grown into a towering oak, and they were the ones suffocating in the shade. The tragedy of their existence was that they could have shared in my success. If they had simply offered a fraction of the love they blindly showered on Bradley, they would be standing on this balcony with me. But they had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. The universe had simply balanced the scales. "Are you ready for the gala?" David asked, his hand gently squeezing my waist, pulling me back from my thoughts. The international press is waiting downstairs. They are going to want a statement from the CEO who managed to pull off the greatest hospitality acquisition of the year. I took one last look at the stunning horizon, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on my face, and the solid, unwavering presence of the man beside me. The cycle of abuse was permanently broken. The shadows of the past had been completely eradicated by the brilliant light of the life I had created. I had fought a brutal war for my own independence, and I had emerged absolutely victorious. I had walked through the fire, and I had built an empire from the ashes. Yes, I said, turning away from the railing and smiling up at him. Let us go celebrate. I have never been more ready in my entire life. The story of Julia teaches us a profound and difficult truth: sharing DNA with someone does not automatically entitle them to a permanent place in your life, especially if their presence brings only toxicity and manipulation. For decades, Julia was conditioned to believe her worth was inextricably tied to her parents' conditional approval. However, her incredible journey ultimately reveals that true security and internal validation must always come from within yourself. When faced with the ultimate family betrayal, Julia did not retaliate with equal cruelty. Instead, she responded with the absolute most powerful tool available to anyone breaking a vicious cycle of generational abuse: ironclad boundaries. By ensuring her parents' basic survival while entirely cutting off their access to her emotional and financial world, she proved that you can show mercy without ever sacrificing your own peace. She successfully stripped away their power simply by refusing to play their toxic game. Furthermore, this inspiring story beautifully redefines the traditional concept of family. The people who genuinely deserve a permanent seat at your table are those who celebrate your victories, respect your boundaries, and actively support your personal growth. Julia found her true family not in the cold home she grew up in, but among the loving partner and loyal colleagues who valued her for exactly who she was. Her massive success was not just a shield against her abusers, it was the natural result of finally investing all her valuable energy directly into herself. If Julia's journey to absolute independence resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about reclaiming your personal power. Share your own experiences of setting difficult boundaries in the comments section below. Remember, your peace of mind is always worth protecting,